Chapter 181. Reinforcements. Beep, 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 beep. Nathan tightened his grip on the short sword, shifting his weight as two Iwagakure Jonin pressed in from either side. Their strikes came fast and furious, but he parried them all, and even managed a few counterattacks that forced his opponents to hesitate. By all rights, he should have been overwhelmed. Instead, he stood his ground. It had begun more than 10 minutes ago, when Nathan first slipped into the heart of the battlefield. Moving along the outskirts, he'd cut down an Iwagakure Chunin and a Genin one after the other. No one paid him any mind at first, until he left a string of over 20 fallen shinobi in his wake. That's when the village's command finally took notice and dispatched these two Jonin to stop him. Now they'd been locked in combat for nearly 3 minutes. Nathan's left arm throbbed from a recent blow, but the injury was minor in close-quarters swordplay. In fact, as the fight wore on, he'd begun to read their individual styles, how one favored wide, sweeping arcs while the other relied on quick, earth-based jutsu to tighten the noose. With that knowledge, Nathan had no intention of prolonging the duel. He was ready to end it and move on to his next target. Nathan dropped his guard entirely and surged forward with everything he had, zeroing in on the weaker of the two Iwagakure Jonin. One was a battle-hardened, fully-fledged Jonin, the other a specialist assassin. Thanks to the three Magatama Sharingan's unnerving clarity, Nathan saw through every feint and false move. As the veteran swung at him, Nathan sidestepped the blow and closed the distance on the assassin. In a single fluid motion, he thrust his short sword straight toward the man's midsection. But the special Jonin was no pushover. His eyes flashed with deadly anticipation. Rather than back away, he twisted his body, the blade of Nathan's sword whistling past harmlessly. In the same heartbeat, he drew a kunai and slashed upward at Nathan's throat. Caught off balance with his sword still extended, Nathan had no time to parry. He scraped backward, the kunai grazing his collarbone as he twisted out of the assassin's lethal arc. Nathan knew that if he chose to dodge now, he would surrender the initiative he'd only just won, and that would give the hidden Iwagakure Jonin the perfect chance to strike from behind and pin him down. If those elite shinobi played it patiently, waited for the exact moment to counterattack, they could put him on the defensive. Even if they couldn't finish him off, they'd at least keep him completely suppressed. He had to admit their plan was sound. Had the fight gone the way they envisioned, he'd be in serious trouble. But, and this was crucial, they hadn't manufactured that opening themselves. Nathan had deliberately baited them into launching a counterattack, so there was nothing to fear from their calculations. Showing no sign of panic, he simply let the assault come. Then, at the last possible instant, he leaned back and slipped out of the special Jonin's lightning-fast strike. Mishima Kazuki should have felt triumphant. Everything on paper was unfolding exactly as he'd planned. Instead, he was seized by a cold, unshakable fear. He stared at Nathan's unflinching expression, his mind scrambling for answers. Just moments ago, Nathan had evaded his strike with a casual sidestep. In any ordinary duel, a fighter would instinctively raise their sword to block first and only attempt to dodge if the defense failed. But Nathan had never even moved to parry. He'd simply slipped out of the way, a decision that spoke volumes about his intent. No matter how powerful the Sharingan's insight, it couldn't alter basic human instinct. And Mishima was certain of what he'd seen. Nathan never meant to block. From the very first moment, he'd chosen to dodge. That choice left him dangerously exposed, unless there was something else at play. A chill ran down Mishima's spine as the pieces suddenly clicked together. "This isn't good," he muttered under his breath, his hand twitching to readied his mouth to warn the others. But before he could speak, an icy wave of crisis washed over him. Nathan's vision narrowed as he raised his left hand, pressing a pale blue sphere of chakra against his bandaged chest. With a sudden puff, the orb burst, pain radiating outward as Mishima Kazuki coughed up blood. The shockwave of Nathan's concealed Rasengan slammed Kazuki across the clearing, sending him skidding into a boulder. This was exactly Nathan's plan. Feign vulnerability to lure his opponents into a false sense of security, then exploit that very misjudgment with a hidden technique. From the outset, he deliberately underused his left arm and wrapped it in tattered bandages, convincing even two seasoned Rocknin, both senior ninja, of his supposed injury. On its own, the ruse might not have been enough. Veterans like Kazuki wouldn't drop their guard completely. But by combining the feint with a no-trace ninjutsu, an unmarked Rasengan, Nathan ensured total surprise. If Kazuki hadn't been duped, he could have evaded the blow. Instead, he lay battered in the dirt, the first critical blow in Nathan's swift, decisive strike toward victory. Nathan shook off his lingering thoughts and shifted his focus away from the wounded Mishima Kazuki, who lay crumpled on the ground, to another Iwagakure Jonin charging straight at him. Undeterred by his comrade's dire state, the newcomer hurled himself into the fight without a second thought, determined to avenge Kazuki. Just as Mishima and Takashi had predicted, Nathan's momentary hesitation cost him the initiative. The Jonin pressed the advantage, forcing Nathan onto the defensive. Yet with Mishima and Takashi too badly hurt to intervene, the assault couldn't last long. Spotting a narrow opening, Nathan countered with brutal precision. Now that one enemy was down, his attacks grew all the more relentless. The remaining Jonin found himself parrying frantically, each block leaving fresh cuts and bruises across his armor. Nathan's blows came faster and harder, driving his opponent onto unsteady footing. Within minutes, the Jonin's guard was faltering, his breathing ragged. He could not hold out much longer. As Nathan prepared to deliver the final strike, a second Iwagakure Jonin sprang into the fray, attacking from his flank. Nathan paused for the briefest moment, surveying the battlefield. Mishima and Takashi still lay incapacitated nearby, while two Jonin now advanced on him. He narrowed his eyes, readying himself for the next wave. The Iwagakure Shinobi now outnumbered Konoha's almost 2-to-1. Even if each Jonin on their side wasn't vastly superior in skill, the sheer weight of their numbers gave them roughly a 1.5-to-1 advantage. And since Han had already incapacitated several of Konoha's Jonin, Iwagakure's fresh reinforcements could rotate in freely, forcing Konoha onto the back foot. Nathan knew he couldn't single-handedly reverse the situation. His strength alone wasn't enough to decide the outcome of this battle, so he had no choice but to keep weaving and countering, staying locked in combat with the two Iwagakure Jonin before him. Time crawled by, each breath a struggle as he fought to prevent himself from being overwhelmed. Then, faintly at first, he heard it, the distant rumble of boots hitting earth, shouts and clashing steel beyond the skirmish line. A moment later, Shanzong Tingfeng's voice echoed inside his mind, clear as if spoken aloud. "Everyone, listen up. Our support has arrived. Link up with the nearest Jonin and break out toward the northwest. Now!" Nathan's heart leapt. The reinforcements from the Hushan camp had finally made it. With renewed hope, he tightened his grip on his weapon and prepared to make his move. Nathan realized that the sudden commotion beyond the battlefield wasn't mere noise. It was Konoha's signal for a breakout. Seizing a narrow opening between the two Iwagakure Jonin who had been dogging his heels, he slipped away and angled northwest. As he ran, the younger Konoha shinobi spotted his headlong dash and swarmed to his side, quickly arming a ragtag squad that followed him in the same direction. Not long after, the other senior ninjas, Chunin and Jonin alike, took up the lead, each assembling teams and driving them toward the promised exit. At first, the Rock Ninobi appeared stunned by Konoha's sudden, perfectly synchronized maneuver, but their surprise lasted only a moment. Almost immediately, they organized patrols and erected a stubborn barricade to thwart the retreat. What had been a fierce battle turned even more chaotic. Konoha's forces, desperate to break free, hurled kunai, shuriken, and explosive tags as though their supply were inexhaustible. The Iwagakure shinobi, equally determined, answered blow for blow, chasing off every advance. For a heartbeat, each side teetered on the edge of collapse, Konoha pressing forward under Nathan's lead, Iwagakure standing firm to deny them any quarter. Explosions bloomed across the field, showers of sparks lighting up the dusk sky. In that maelstrom, the fate of the skirmish would be decided. Either Konoha's hardened shinobi would carve out their escape, or the Rock Ninobi would break their line and crush their bid for freedom. Moreover, with both sides' ninjas clustered so closely, the veteran fighters unleashed powerful, large-scale offensive ninjutsu, and the resulting clash was even more fierce. Chapter 182. Breakout, Escape, Earth Flow Wall. An Iwagakure Jonin strode forward, swiftly forming his hand seals. With a roar of chakra, a towering earthen barrier shot up from the ground, cutting off the advance of a squad of Konoha shinobi. For a heartbeat, it stood unbroken, then dozens of detonating tags exploded against its surface, and a pressurized torrent of water jutsu slammed into it like a high-powered fire hose. Cracks raced across the wall, and within seconds it collapsed in a spray of dirt and rubble. The Jonin himself was thrown backward, battered and bleeding, but his sacrifice had not been in vain. While he drew the Konoha team's attention, reinforcements from Iwagakure poured in behind him, harrying the intruders and preventing their retreat. As a result, at least some of the enemy had to be left behind as casualties, victims of a perfectly timed ambush. This desperate pattern repeated itself across the battlefield. Teams from every village struggled through the choke points, only to run into similar hit-and-run tactics. A handful of stronger Jonin managed to shield most of their squads, while less powerful teams were forced to abandon several comrades to make their escape. Among all the Jonin, Nathan stood out. His mastery of both taijutsu and ninjutsu was well known, and under his leadership, more of his teammates made it through the kill zones alive. Beside him, the survivors rallied, scars and bruises testament to the fierce resistance they'd faced, but spirits unbroken. As Nathan turned to organize their next move, he knew this breakout was only the first step. The real challenge lay ahead, outrunning the pursuit and finding a safe route home. Nathan's transformation had unintended consequences. Their small squad had now become a beacon for Iwagakure's ninja patrols. No sooner had he revealed those two deep-red 3 Magatama Sharingan eyes than an Iwa Jonin and more than 20 mid-level Genin emerged to flank them from both front and rear. "Team leader?" someone hissed, panic rising in their voice. Nathan offered a single, imperious shake of his head. No words were necessary. He tightened his grip on his kunai and strode forward, unhesitating. Behind him, his teammates exchanged determined looks, bracing themselves for a fight to the death. But the battle they feared never truly began. As they closed in on the lead Jonin, Nathan's Sharingan flared to life. Every movement slowed, every breath counted, as the hypnotic power of his dojutsu washed over the unsuspecting Iwagakure veteran. Despite years of defending against Uchiha clansmen, the Jonin couldn't resist the genjutsu's pull. One by one, the surrounding Genin froze in place. No preamble, no parley, just a swift, merciless sweep of crimson power. When the hallucinatory twilight lifted, Nathan stood alone amid a motionless field of enemies. The message was clear: challenge him at your own peril. Nathan sensed something was wrong the instant the moment arrived and instinctively shifted his gaze away. With swift precision, he drew a handful of kunai from his ninja pouch, each blade fitted with a detonating talisman at its hilt, clear proof of his thorough preparation. Without hesitation, he unleashed them all at once. But instead of aiming at the Iwagakure Jonin, the kunai scattered in a graceful arc, like blossoms caught on a spring breeze, and swept toward the enemy's ranks, specifically the less experienced Genin. "Look out!" one of the Iwagakure Jonin shouted, but his warning came too late. Only 2 kunai were intercepted in midair, thanks to the lightning-fast reflexes of a nearby Chunin. The rest streaked into the formation. Though the Genin's training allowed them to tuck and dodge at the last second, averting what could have been a devastating bloodbath, their defensive maneuvers shattered the team's rhythm and left them momentarily disoriented. Amid a haze of smoke and flickering embers, Nathan vanished and reappeared at the very heart of a circle of Iwagakure shinobi as though he'd teleported. Activating his blinking technique, he flowed seamlessly into level 5 swordsmanship, each strike guided by the 3 Magatama Sharingan. In that instant, he became a phantom assassin, slipping through the rock village ninja like a wraith. His dagger sang through the air, a reaper's scythe that left devastation in its wake. Unprepared for the speed and precision of his onslaught, the Iwa ninjas fell one by one. Blades pierced hidden angles of vision, snapping bones and severing lives before their owners even realized they were under attack. In mere seconds, Nathan had wounded nearly 10 shinobi, ending half of them with a single, fatal blow. 2 Jonin surged forward to halt him, but Nathan's preternatural positioning, combined with the confusion he sowed among the enemy ranks, let him slip past their guard with effortless grace. Frustration boiled over in the senior Jonin's eyes. He roared, "Get out of my way!" A gust of displaced air whipped dust and ash around them, and the genin standing at the perimeter couldn't suppress their excitement. Finally, they thought they'd see their elders challenge this deadly intruder and perhaps prove themselves in battle. Nathan watched as the enemy's ranks fractured, men scrambling away as if their lives depended on it, because they did. None dared face him directly. Without a second thought, he sprinted after them, his blade moving in a blur as he cut down fleeing shinobi one by one. But the Iwagakure forces soon scattered into small, erratic groups, losing the tight formation that once protected them. By the time Nathan had claimed another victim and wounded 2 more, a single jonin stepped forward to block his path. Steel rang against steel as kunai met dagger in a deadly embrace. The jonin pressed the assault, blades whirling, but Nathan held firm. Then, in the very instant their weapons locked, Nathan's expression shifted. He drew in a sharp breath, raised his left arm, and placed a single hand over his heart. With surprising calm, he shaped the seal for fire release, Phoenix Immortal Fire, executed entirely with one hand. What? The jonin's cry of shock cut through the chaos. He stumbled back, eyes wide, utterly unprepared for the power Nathan was about to unleash. In that heartbeat of silence, the battlefield braced itself for the inferno to come. Nathan didn't strike his primary target. Instead, he deftly steered the fireballs he'd unleashed into the ranks of the surrounding Iwagakure genin, carving a corridor through their formation. "Move," he bellowed, jolting the Konoha shinobi at the rear from their daze and propelling them forward. The rock shinobi, though taken aback, quickly rallied their survivors and gave chase, but by then, Nathan's team had already punched through to the prearranged rally point. There, other Konoha squads were waiting, and within moments their numbers swelled enough to make any rash pursuit too risky for the hidden rock forces. Just as the dust settled, a pulse of chakra flooded Nathan's mind and a familiar voice crackled in his ears. "Jonin Nathan, proceed immediately to 3 o'clock. Assist the other jonin units in stopping the Five Tails Jinchuriki from reaching our main line." He recognized the command instantly. It was Shanzhong Tingfeng. Nathan absorbed the new orders at once. He checked his status, over 18,000 chakra points, and, thanks to a hastily cast healing jutsu on the march, the reopened wound on his left arm was stable enough for now. All told, his fighting strength still hovered around 90%, plenty to lend support. Under his breath, he acknowledged the command. Understood. Immediately, the pressure of foreign chakra in his mind vanished. Nathan knew that Shanzhong Tingfeng had dropped their psychic link. How convenient it was, this telepathic secret art. He signaled his squad to integrate with the other teams, then focused his chakra and vanished in a flash. Activating the body flicker technique, he streaked toward 3 o'clock, guided not by precise coordinates, but by the thunderous clash of steel and the tainted roar of the tailed beast's evil chakra. Those unmistakable war cries were all the direction he needed. Within moments, Nathan reappeared at the edge of the fray, ready to tip the scales of battle. Chapter 183, Evacuation Boom. A deafening explosion rocked the woods before Nathan even reached the clearing. He could hear the clash of combat up ahead, shouts, the crackle of chakra, and then a lone figure, wreathed in dark red energy, burst from the undergrowth and charged straight toward him. It could only be Han. Without a moment's hesitation, Nathan formed a series of hand seals. Drawing on the wind release techniques taught by Master Xiaoyuan Shi, he unleashed wind release, wind blade. In an instant, a translucent blade of compressed air, over a meter long, coalesced in front of his chest. Thrusting his palm forward, he sent the razor-sharp wind blade hurtling at his opponent. Han didn't flinch or dodge, he simply barreled on. The blade sliced through him, sending concentric ripples across his crimson chakra cloak and slowing his charge, yet he emerged completely unharmed, coming to a smooth halt a few meters away. Nathan's heart sank. At level 1 proficiency, Windblade should have dealt serious damage, but clearly it wasn't enough. He cursed under his breath, then let his Sharingan flare to its fullest extent, determined to turn the tide of this battle. Suddenly, an overwhelming mental weight pressed down on the clearing. Han felt that invisible force and instinctively slowed, his steps faltering as he leveled a wary stare at Nathan. Nathan, however, showed no sign of concern. The moment their eyes locked, he triggered his Sharingan's hypnotic power. Han, whether thrown off by the Ninetales' lingering will inside him or simply caught off guard, didn't look away in time. The hypnotic wave washed over him, and he crumpled to the ground, unconscious. A deep, feral roar split the air. The roar of the Five Tails shattered the illusion. Only a fully perfected Jinchuriki and its tailed beast can truly dispel genjutsu, yet Han's own beast, though only half awakened, lent him enough mental fortitude to resist. In any case, Nathan had employed only a Sharingan hypnosis, not a full illusion technique, so Han was able to break free rather quickly. He sprang to his feet, eyes blazing, but Nathan barely blinked. He simply tilted his head as if nothing at all had happened. Nathan hadn't expected to fell his opponent so quickly. He'd only needed a split-second opening. The moment Han shook off the last remnants of the Five Tails hypnosis and locked eyes with him, Nathan struck. Instantly, Han stiffened as if dozens of iron nails had driven through his limbs, pinning him to the spot. Nathan had seized the exact instant Han lost consciousness to unleash his magic jail hang technique. Unlike ordinary illusions, this spell lets its victim know they're under enchantment while robbing them of nearly all will to resist. Even the residual power of the Five Tails couldn't free Han immediately. With Han immobilized in Nathan's magical snare, the shinobi from Konoha would arrive in time to help, exactly as Nathan had planned. He'd never intended to take down Han alone. It would have drawn too much attention and carried too much risk. All Nathan needed was delay, long enough for his fellow Jonin to close in and subdue Han together. Luckily, their footsteps were already echoing through the trees not far behind him. Nathan barely had time to register that his clash with Han, though drawn out in tension, had lasted no more than a few seconds. Before he could fully brace himself, several figures burst from the dense forest and converged on the clearing. They took in the scene at a glance, Han standing firm, Nathan's Sharingan activated, and immediately sprang into coordinated action. Two of the newcomers wove hand signs in unison, unleashing a powerful sealing jutsu designed to pin Han in place and prevent him from retreating or picking off their allies from a distance. At the same moment, three others formed intricate seals of their own, preparing to launch high-level offensive ninjutsu aimed at tearing through Han's tailed beast cloak and inflicting real damage. Watching from the flank, a sixth shinobi readied a volley of kunai and steel. Ires, each rigged with dense explosive tags, ready to ensnare Han physically and deliver a devastating shock. Sensing the sudden shift in momentum, Han's eyes narrowed. He realized instantly that he was now facing a full-fledged ambush, one that combined both gentle art and brute force. As chakra crackled around him, he prepared to counterattack, knowing that the next moments would decide the outcome of this fierce skirmish. Even with the tailed beast cloak shielding him, Nathan knew he couldn't simply stand still and take Han's onslaught forever. At some point, even the strongest defense would crack. Sensing that critical moment, Han banished all hesitation. He loosened his mental barriers and let the tailed beast's will flow unchecked. Immediately, denser, more potent chakra pulsed over his skin, and the two ethereal tails fanning out behind him multiplied into three. A violent, predatory aura radiated outward as he roared and thrashed in a desperate bid for freedom. Nathan felt a blinding pain sear behind his eyes, just as Han's surge shattered the magic jail hang technique. Blood and tears mingled on his cheeks. Alarmed, the nearby Konoha Jonin closed in at once. "Nathan, are you all right?" one of them shouted. Nathan staggered back 2 paces, pressing a hand to his brow. "I'm okay, but be careful." He didn't need to say more. The Jonin immediately tightened their formation, rekindling the focus they'd lost in earlier skirmishes. Never before had Han unleashed such a ferocious power, and they weren't about to let guard down again. However, events rapidly spiraled beyond their expectations. Han, the half-tailed beast before them, sprouted a third tail as his chakra and presence boomed skyward, and with that surge of power came a drastic fall in his rationality. Nathan and the others hadn't intended to kill him, only to contain him, yet in this maddened state, their task paradoxically grew simpler. After all, facing a raging beast is far less delicate than negotiating with a trapped but sentient opponent. Although tailed beasts possess intelligence on par with humans, Months of confinement had warped Han's instincts. His sole reaction was to obliterate everything in sight. To keep him occupied, Konoha Shinobi took turns striking and luring him, funneling his focus away from the village. Minutes crawled by under the scorching sun. Then, scouts from the Hidden Rock village arrived, alerted by the mounting chaos. Han, completely beyond reason now, unleashed his fury on both Rock and Leaf Shinobi, tearing through their ranks with raw, indiscriminate power. In an instant, the field descended into utter bedlam. Konoha and Rock ninjas clashed alongside one another, even as the frenzied beast rampaged mercilessly among them. Minutes later, Nathan and the others finally received their new orders. The main force had regrouped and pulled ahead of the Rock ninjas, carving out a safe corridor for their retreat. Exchanging determined nods, Nathan's team fell back in perfect sync, covering one another as they withdrew toward the rendezvous point. Behind them, the Rock ninjas hesitated until Nathan seized the moment. He locked eyes with one pursuer and unleashed his Genjutsu Sharingan, ensnaring the ninja in a disorienting illusion. As the enemy staggered in confusion, Han lunged forward, delivering a crushing blow that left him writhing on the ground. Seeing their comrades struck down so decisively, the remaining Rock ninjas abandoned the chase. With the path now clear, Nathan and his squad slipped away from the battlefield, regrouping safely with the main force. Chapter 184, End Night, had fallen, closing in after nearly 10 hours of continuous pursuit and battle. Nathan and his squad had finally shaken off Han and the Iwagakure senior ninjas, rejoining the battered remnants of the main force. Together, they'd beaten back wave after wave of attackers, buying themselves a fleeting moment of safety. It was only temporary. Of course, the Iwagakure would not abandon their chase. But for now, both sides were exhausted and in desperate need of rest. In the flickering light of the makeshift camp, Nathan moved among the wounded with the medical corps. The aftermath of the ambush was all too grisly. What had begun as a reinforced scouting party of nearly 400 shinobi had been cut down almost in half. Nearly 200 lay dead, and fewer than 180 survivors limped back, each one bearing fresh wounds. Then, when the Tiger Mountain camp's reinforcements arrived to aid them, they too had suffered casualties. Now, more than 300 injured shinobi needed immediate medical attention. Nathan tightened his grip on his healer's pack, steeling himself for a long night. Limbs needed setting, wounds needed cleaning, and tired hearts needed reassurance. It wasn't just flesh and bone that had been wounded today, but also morale. And in the dark ahead, both would need to be healed. It was proving tough for the medical ninjas to handle the steady stream of wounded shinobi, so the commanders called in reinforcements and drafted Nathan. He welcomed the opportunity without hesitation. With his healing technique already over 80% proficient, treating another 20 or 30 injured fighters would push him to the next level. This was exactly the break he needed. Once he advanced, he could master advanced methods like the palm fairy technique and the chakra scalpel. Beyond that, he planned to focus on strengthening his body to close the gap between his physical and spiritual attributes, and lay the groundwork for awakening the Mangekyo Sharingan. Steeling his mind, Nathan set to work, pouring chakra into each wound with precision. Minutes slipped by uncounted. 2 hours passed in what felt like moments. As he laid chakra seals around the last sutures on a Konoha Chunin's injury, a sudden insight illuminated his understanding of the healing technique. Instinctively, he summoned his chakra control panel. Sure enough, the progress bar for healing technique had jumped to level 5, perfected at 0. A new chapter in his training was about to begin. Nathan flexed his left arm, willing the new technique to take effect. Almost immediately, a gentle warmth spread from his palm outward, and the half-healed gash along his forearm began knitting itself closed at an astonishing rate. He compared it in his mind to the last time he'd used the skill, and realized the healing power had skyrocketed by roughly 30%. This kind of leap in effectiveness was nothing short of miraculous, worthy, he thought, of a perfected jutsu. But it wasn't only the healing that had improved. As he watched flesh and sinew reweave themselves beneath his skin, Nathan felt his understanding of Yangtun chakra deepen. Until now, he'd believed that only once his palm fairy technique reached an advanced level could he safely channel Yangtun energy into his own body. Yet here he was, wielding it already, and wielding it well. Seizing the opportunity provided by his rest period, Nathan formed the familiar hand seals and gathered the chakra coiling within him. Instead of unleashing the Yangtun chakra immediately to heal, he restrained it in his core, guiding it through his meridians to suffuse every cell with invigorating energy. At first, he felt nothing more than a gentle tingling. Then, as the chakra permeated deeper, a soothing warmth bloomed across his limbs, like slipping into a steaming hot spring on a crisp morning. Nathan settled back, eyes closed, and allowed the flow to continue. Each pulse of Yangtun energy fortified his body from the inside out, accelerating his natural recovery and bolstering his strength for whatever trials lay ahead. As the healing completed and the last trace of pain faded, he opened his eyes, brimming with quiet confidence. He had crossed a new threshold, and there was no turning back. Nathan frowned at his status panel, where his physique attributes stubbornly refused to budge despite his repeated attempts. He knew the method was sound. It had to be a matter of too little time elapsed, or the yang-infused chakra he'd condensed with the healing technique simply being too weak. There was only one answer. He needed to advance to the immortal palm technique. Closing the panel, Nathan sat cross-legged and shut his eyes, running through every detail of the immortal palm technique in his mind. To his surprise, his years of refining chakra control with the healing technique paid off immediately. He gained 3 proficiency points in a single practice session. At this rate, 30 more repetitions would push him past the technique's entry requirement. It was a clear reminder of how different he was from a typical genius. Even prodigies with the exact same foundation often struggle, sometimes irreparably, to learn a higher-level jutsu. Nathan, however, had no such limitation. With a solid foundation, Nathan could tap into the proficiency panel and rack up skill points at lightning speed, exactly what he was doing now. By thinking through each movement and repeating it in his mind, he laid the groundwork for the Palm Immortal technique in just over half an hour. The progress was staggering, but it came at a price. Every proficiency point in that technique drained at least 150 chakra. Thankfully, his chakra control was already at level 4, reducing the cost by 20%. Without that efficiency boost, the expenditure would have been far greater. Luckily, Nathan's chakra reserves were plentiful, so he powered through the training without a hitch. Just as he prepared to demonstrate the next move, the chakra scalpel, a Konoha Chunin came sprinting up. She looked frantic, but straight away asked if Nathan had fully recovered. It was a bold approach, considering her only remaining teammate and boyfriend lay gravely injured and unconscious back at the village. With no time to lose and no one else qualified to help, she'd risked everything to seek out Nathan. "Jonin Nathan, please, save Kaneki. I can't lose him." The female shinobi, Akao Jing, pressed her small hand against Nathan's sleeve, her voice cracking with desperation. He looked down at her, calm and silent for a moment, then simply nodded. "Lead the way." Akao Jing blinked in surprise. She'd assumed that an Uchiha Jonin would be difficult to sway, but Nathan's swift agreement told her otherwise. What she didn't know was that he'd been itching to test his newly mastered Palm Immortal technique, and rescuing one more wounded ninja wouldn't upset the medical team's balance, which he'd arranged himself. Without another word, she guided him through the Leaf Village's medical wing. In less than a minute, they arrived at a small side room. Inside sat Kaneki, a young Konoha Chunin, slumped against the wall. Blood-soaked bandages crisscrossed his torso and limbs, but the most alarming injury was the deep knife wound slicing from his left shoulder down to his right hip. Dark rivulets of blood seeped through the makeshift dressings. Nathan knelt beside Kaneki and placed a steady hand on his friend's shoulder. Akao Jing held her breath as he closed his eyes, channeling chakra into the Palm Immortal technique. A faint glow pulsed around his hand. This one desperate gamble might be the only thing standing between Kaneki and death. Fortunately, the wounded man was a chakra-using ninja. Otherwise, he'd have bled out long ago. Nathan stepped forward and began a careful examination of the injuries. After a moment, he allowed himself a small relieved smile. If he hadn't just mastered the Palm Immortal technique, vastly improving his ability to treat external wounds, he wouldn't have dared take on such severe trauma. But now, thanks to his new skill, the situation was far less as dire than it first appeared. Nathan turned to Akao Jing, who stood nearby, and quietly instructed her, "Keep watch here and make sure no one disturbs us." She straightened at once, resolve shining in her eyes. "Don't worry, Joan and Nathan. No one will interrupt you." He nodded once, satisfied. This was the heart of the camp. An intrusion was unlikely. Still, he'd given the order to prevent any well-meaning ninja from rushing in at the last minute, hoping to rescue the same patient. Now, with the perimeter secure, Nathan could focus fully on stabilizing the injured man's condition. Nathan took a steadying breath, centered his energy, then knelt beside Kaneki and carefully began treating his wounds. Chapter 185, Treatment. Nathan peeled back the blood-soaked bandage from Jinmu's chest. Instantly, a torrent of crimson poured out. Even in his comatose state, Jinmu groaned, and his face grew paler still. Unfazed, Nathan gently cleansed the wound, rinsing away clotted flesh and debris until only raw tissue remained. He pressed his palms together, wove a series of tight hand seals, and unleashed the Palm Immortal technique, a newly mastered A-rank medical ninjutsu. Though the standard healing technique could close simple cuts, it lacked the power to repair internal damage. Jinmu's blade had pierced deep into his torso, threatening vital organs. Without the Palm Immortal technique, those injuries would have been beyond repair. Nathan channeled his chakra like warm sunlight, letting it seep into Jinmu's chest. Beneath his steady hands, torn sinews knitted back together and shattered tissues regenerated. He finished the sequence with a soft exhalation. Just days ago, he'd completed his training, and now, by unfortunate chance, Akao Jing had summoned him to save a life teetering on the brink. As the last whispers of injury faded, Nathan stepped back, certain he had done all he could. Nathan's heart pounded. Kaneki couldn't die, not on his watch. Summoning every ounce of will, he pressed his hands, bathed in a soft green glow, against the jagged wound on Kaneki's chest. Immediately, a warm flood of yang chakra poured from his palms into the injured body, and he focused all his concentration on guiding that life force. Under Nathan's careful direction, the damaged cells began to divide and regenerate. Within a few breaths, the bleeding slowed, and Kaneki's ashen complexion started to return to normal. Tiny buds of pink granulation tissue sprouted along the edges of the gash, quivering as they knitted themselves together into healthy flesh. Though rapid enough to be witnessed, the process still required time and Nathan's unwavering focus. Minutes ticked by. Nathan felt his head swim with fatigue, but he refused to look away. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity but was only 15 minutes, he gingerly withdrew his hands. The wound was gone, replaced by smooth, unblemished skin. Panting, Nathan let out a long, relieved breath. His mental reserves felt dangerously low, but the sacrifice was worth it. Kaneki was alive. Nathan not only managed to save the injured man, he also reaped a significant reward in his cultivation. Curious, he opened his status panel and saw that his Palm Immortal Art proficiency had leapt from level 1, 200, to level 1, 51, 200. A 50-point gain in just 15 minutes was remarkable. The secret to such rapid growth lay in the foundation laid by his healing art. Even though Palm Immortal Art had already entered the door, its bonus effect remained, now granting twice the usual experience rate instead of the original triple boost. Combined with the hands-on practice of actually treating a serious injury, Nathan's skills soared. At this pace, tending to just 4 or 5 more badly wounded patients would push him to the next rank. Fortunately, there was no shortage of injured people here. Nathan realized he'd stumbled upon the perfect opportunity to advance his Palm Immortal Art. Nathan was still lost in thought when Akao Jing approached him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Joan and Nathan, is Kaneki all right?" She spoke as if afraid to disturb him. Nathan shook off his reverie, met her anxious gaze, and gave a small nod. "He'll be fine, no lasting damage." Relief flooded her features. She clasped her hands together. "Thank you so much," she breathed. "I can't tell you how grateful I am." Nathan managed a modest shrug and turned to leave, but a flicker of movement caught his eye. Kaneki's torso had been fully restored, but thin rivulets of blood still trickled from cuts on his arms and legs. Without a word, Nathan held out a hand and channeled his chakra into the wounds. Within minutes, the last traces of injury vanished, and in the process, Nathan felt his mastery of the palm immortal technique deepen, earning him over 10 proficiency points. Akao Jing's profuse thanks followed him as he departed, but Nathan didn't stop to tend the other injured soldiers. Instead, he made his way back to the secluded spot where he'd been resting. There, free from interruption, he planned to turn all his focus to the chakra scalpel, a technique he was determined to master before pushing his palm immortal proficiency any further. Nathan seized every opportunity to hone his skill with the chakra scalpel by treating any wounds that came his way. He dove into practice at once, focusing intently as he replayed the technique's principles in his mind. The chakra scalpel, a medical ninjutsu of the same rank as the palm immortal art, was notoriously demanding, but Nathan's firm grounding in the healing art and palm immortal art let him make rapid progress. Before long, he noticed something important. His level 4 chakra control was uniquely suited to this technique. After studying its requirements, Nathan realized that the chakra scalpel depended on exceptionally precise chakra modulation, exactly what his current control level provided. With that clarity, each training session yielded faster gains in proficiency. By the time he paused to rest, he'd effectively mastered the two most crucial medical ninjutsu skills. From now on, ordinary cuts, bruises, and even mild internal injuries would no longer pose a fatal threat. Nathan knew that if he could master the B-rank ninjutsu, the art of eliciting fine wounds, the poisons ninjas usually rely on would pose no threat to him. His safety would improve dramatically. After weighing his options, he withdrew into himself and took stock of his remaining chakra. He was down to about half his capacity. He could leave now and go rescue the others, but something held him back. Instead of practicing the palm immortal technique or refining his chakra scalpel, Nathan quietly set about restoring his chakra reserves. 10,000 points of chakra still felt inadequate. He needed more before facing any further danger. Minutes ticked away as he sat in meditation. 2 hours later, Nathan's eyes flew open. His chakra had climbed to roughly 17,000 points, an increase of 5,000. Of course, this surge didn't come solely from his chakra refining technique. At level 4, it only replenishes about 800 points per hour. The rest must have come from his own rapid recovery, bolstered by his unique physiology. Feeling far more secure with his newfound reserves, Nathan rose to his feet, ready at last to join the fight. Nathan's ability to restore 5,000 chakra points in just 2 hours owed everything to the recent boosts in his physical and spiritual attributes. His body could now regenerate chakra at an astonishing rate. Still, no matter how fast he healed, he couldn't exceed a daily cap of 21,000 points without placing undue strain on his body and jeopardizing his foundations. Right now, his chakra refining technique hovered on the brink of a breakthrough. At this pace, he'd need about 10 more days to advance. When that day came, the daily limit would vanish, and he'd be able to wield far greater reserves of chakra. Pushing those thoughts aside, Nathan turned toward the cluster of injured fighters and resumed his training, determined to sharpen his skills even further. Chapter 186, Harvest. The moon slipped below the horizon as dawn's light crept across the sky. In what felt like the blink of an eye, the long night was over. In the makeshift camp, Nathan stirred awake. He closed his eyes for a moment, focused his thoughts, and summoned his proficiency panel. Immediately, the familiar pale blue screen materialized before him. Nathan, formerly Uchiha Qingming, age 11, current attributes, physique 11, spirit 15, chakra capacity 25,012, previously 23,572, Kekgenkai, Sharingan 3 Magatama 9,999's 10,000. Skill proficiencies, chakra refinement technique 4, 1,912, 2,000, fire style, great fireball technique of a 4, 232,000, fire style, dragon fire technique 4, 210, 2,000. Wind style, great breakthrough 3, 502, 1,000, wind style, wind blade 2, 200. Shadow clone technique level 2, 101 through 500. Chakra absorption technique level 5, 1,230/5,000. Rasengan, level 3, 660,000. Palm Fairy Technique 2, Chakra Scalpel, Chakra 2, 2,500. Genjutsu, Sharingan, 6, 545. 10,000, Reflection of the Heart Technique, level 7, 4,885, 20,000. Sword Technique 5, 2,710. Chakra Control, Fall 4, 980, 2,000. 3 Body Technique, level 3. Body Instant Technique, Ninja Tool Throwing, level Fire Style. House Fairy Fiery Fire Technique. Magic, Shackle Technique, level 5. Healing Technique, 5. Summary of recent progress. In the past 10 days, Nathan has made remarkable strides in his Genjutsu mastery through the Sharingan and in his sword technique. Aside from those 2 areas, his other abilities have remained largely steady. Nathan stared at his status panel, marveling at how far he'd come in just a few days. His rapid advancement in medical ninjutsu was no accident. During the early stages of the journey, he'd pushed himself to the limit, channeling every bit of recovered chakra into his healing techniques. As for his combat skills, the relentless stream of fierce battles had forged them in fire, each clash a real-world test that honed his reflexes and tactics. His other techniques, by contrast, saw only incremental gains. Opportunities to deploy them had been scarce, and he'd managed to use them just a handful of times in combat. Still, even those limited encounters nudged his proficiency upward. Overall, however, the panel's updates were impressive. First and foremost, Nathan's healing technique was now fully perfected. There would be no need for further practice. Next, his mastery of wind-style ninjutsu had reached a new threshold. He'd unlocked the wind style, Wind Blade, an ability he'd cleverly replicated from Hideji Ohara using the Sharingan's copying power. Finally, 2 brand-new medical ninjutsu appeared on his roster, the Palm Immortal Technique and Chakra Scalpel. Despite being freshly learned, both had progressed astonishingly quickly. Nathan grinned, recalling the previous night. He'd worked until the early hours, pushing harder than ever and nearly draining his chakra reserves to nothing. It had been grueling, but the payoff was clear. Both new skills rested comfortably at level 2. Satisfied, he closed the panel. Tomorrow, he'd continue his journey stronger than ever. Although the increase wasn't enormous, it was far from negligible, and it was clear Nathan would keep growing at this pace over the next few days. After all, more than 300 injured couldn't be treated in a single afternoon. There were only a handful of medical ninjas who'd set out with the team, and since some had fallen in recent battles, that number was even smaller. Nathan knew he'd have to close that gap soon if he wanted to keep stacking proficiency points quickly. He shut the interface, formed the familiar hand seals, and activated his Palm Immortal technique to rein in the condensed Yang-style chakra within him. The energy coursed through his chakra meridians, flooding every cell with revitalizing warmth. A soothing comfort washed over him, and then he drifted into a light state of calm, eyes gently closing. Minutes passed in silence. When Nathan finally opened his eyes, he reopened the interface and scanned his stats. He couldn't suppress a disappointed shake of his head. His physique attribute hadn't changed at all. Even this internal strengthening fell short of the healing technique's gains. Still too low a level? Nathan groaned, snapping his scroll case shut as he began stowing his gear. In just a few minutes, the squad would depart, and he'd have to test his new theory on the go. He was fairly confident, though. The Palm Spirit technique and the standard healing ninjutsu both relied on yang-infused chakra to stimulate cellular regeneration. As his mastery grew, the Palm Spirit's fortification effects would naturally surpass those of ordinary medical ninjutsu. It all came down to whether he'd unlocked level 3 or level 4. Level 3 meant he could hit the next milestone soon and confirm the technique's true power. Level 4 would require a longer wait. Lost in thought, Nathan looked up as a Konoha Chunin messenger hurried forward to summon him to the briefing. Nodding, he slung his pack over his shoulder and joined the other jonin in the war room. The meeting was succinct, just an outline of their next destination and each jonin's assigned sector of responsibility. Since they feared another encirclement by the Rock Village Shinobi, last night they sent an urgent communique to base camp. The answer came back swift: abandon the advance on Tiger Mountain Camp and fall back to the fortified position just ahead of it, the old Rock Village line. It meant relinquishing a sizable tract of newly secured ground, but it was still Rain Country territory. Better to cede land than lose men. Their priority was clear: preserve the fighting force. Aside from the change in destination, the only major shakeup fell upon Nathan. Because of his knowledge of medical ninjutsu and the growing number of wounded, Chunin Narashishui pulled him from the front lines. From now on, Nathan would accompany the medical corps, tending to injuries and ensuring the team stayed battle-ready throughout the retreat. The rest of the squad merely shuffled duties to fill the gaps. Nathan's path, however, had taken on a new, vital purpose. Nathan didn't hesitate. This was exactly the opportunity he'd been waiting for. Over the next 3 days, he worked side by side with the Hidden Leaf's medical ninjas, tending to their wounded as they marched toward the enemy's stronghold. As predicted, the Iron Country Shinobi caught up, and fierce skirmishes broke out time and again. Each clash only swelled the ranks of the injured, pushing Nathan and his fellow medics to their limits. Still, the effort paid off. By the time the unit reached its forward base on day 3, Nathan's Palm Immortal technique had advanced to level 3, 102-1000. At this stage, channeling Yang Release Chakra through the palm was virtually as potent as a level 5 healing technique. Nathan guessed that one more rank up would unlock truly dramatic power, an idea that filled him with renewed hope. His chakra scalpel was improving too. Though not yet ready for level 3, it had climbed to Proficiency 2, 425, placing it well within reach of its next evolution. Exhausted but encouraged, Nathan prepared himself for the battles still to come, his healing and combat skills growing stronger with every patient he saved. Nathan's 2 medical ninjutsu advanced so quickly thanks entirely to the Stone Ninja's relentless pursuit. It wasn't that they created more casualties. There were already more than enough injured teammates for him to practice on, but their constant attacks gave Nathan the opportunity to replenish his chakra reserves. Once he'd promoted both the Palm Immortal technique and the chakra scalpel to level 2, the healing technique's own regeneration bonus had become almost negligible. His natural, daily chakra recovery simply wasn't enough to fuel further breakthroughs. Yet each fresh skirmish supplied him with an influx of external chakra, eliminating any shortfall. That's why Nathan credited their perseverance for his rapid progress. Chapter 187, Back to Business. Nathan knelt by the side of his injured comrades, carefully cleaning and bandaging fresh wounds in the dimly lit infirmary of the Iwagakure stronghold. He'd barely finished suturing a deep cut on one of the shinobi's arms when a muffled boom shook the walls. A second blast followed, then a third, each one unmistakably the crack of exploding tags going off in rapid succession. "That can't be good," Nathan muttered, rising to his feet. He set aside his medical tools and stepped out into the corridor, weaving past stretchers and overturned stools until he reached a narrow window overlooking the courtyard. Below him, a squad of leaf shinobi poured out from several buildings, sprinting toward the source of the detonations. Their kunai glinted in the fading daylight as they fanned out to cover each other. On the far side, Stone Village operatives scrambled to regroup, drawing swords and preparing to counterattack. Nathan watched tensely. This was the 7th day the Konoha forces had besieged the stronghold, striking in small raids that had escalated into 4 full-scale skirmishes, each one involving over 100 combatants. Every clash had left the defenders battered and short on supplies, and though Nathan had put his medical ninjutsu through its paces, he was running low on healing salves. He took a steadying breath. The recent lull had been too quiet. Now, with explosions punctuating the chaos again, he knew the next wave of fighting was imminent. Sliding the window shut behind him, Nathan gathered his healing scrolls and sprinted back to the infirmary. "We've got more wounded incoming," he called to the medics lining up bandages. "Get ready. It's about to get rough out there." As he dashed back toward the front lines, Nathan's mind sharpened. Bandages and antidotes in hand, he steeled himself for the next round. This stronghold was all that stood between the Stone Village and a full-scale breach. And Nathan, no matter how tired, would be there to patch up every shinobi who fell defending it. Nathan surveyed the battlefield after yet another clash and noted that Iwakure's losses weren't vastly greater than Konoha's. The problem wasn't so much the number of fallen shinobi as it was their fighting prowess. On average, Iwagakure's warriors lacked the raw strength of leaf ninjas, so even equal attrition hit them harder. As a result, the fortress-breaking offensives of the past few days have given way to small-unit harassment raids. Both sides now find themselves locked in a tense stalemate. You might wonder why Iwagakure can't simply send in more troops. The answer is blunt. They don't have them. It isn't only Nathan's squad facing Konoha's onslaught. The entire front has shifted to defense. Nearly two-thirds of Iwagakure's first-line fortifications have already fallen to the Leaf Army, and those units are already pushing toward the second defensive ring. Holding these positions will demand fresh manpower, lots of it. If sheer numbers were the only concern, Iwagakure could scrape together reinforcements from the reserve ranks. But the real issue runs deeper. Their shinobi lack the individual combat quality to stand toe-to-toe with Konoha's best. Without closing that gap, no amount of extra bodies will tip the scales back in their favor. Konoha's sudden counterattack changed everything. Seizing their chance, the Sand and Cloud villages moved in against Iwagakure. The Sand Shinobi, already fighting in the Rain Country, redirected their assault toward a nearby Iwa stronghold. At the same time, Cloud forces, united in vengeance for the Third Raikage's death at Iwagakure's hands, pressed an all-out attack on the border outposts. Now besieged on three fronts, Iwagakure simply didn't have the reserves to respond. Even Han, their most formidable warrior, had been reassigned elsewhere. With every front secured and no threat of a counter-withdrawal, the Sand and Cloud shinobi settled in for the long haul. That left Nathan free to return to his own clandestine enterprise, abducting hostile ninja to serve as living chakra batteries. After all, extracting 21,000 chakra points a day was hardly enough for his training regimen. Nathan knew that without sufficient external chakra, his power growth would stall. Capturing prisoners was not just desirable, but essential. Scanning the distant battlefield, he realized today offered the perfect opportunity. He'd already scouted an ideal holding site in recent days. Now all that remained was to deploy his men. Silently, he slipped out of the field hospital and raced toward the fighting. At the forest's edge, where trees crowded in on the clash of steel, two Iwagakure Chunin crouched over the body of a slain Konoha comrade. Blood seeped into the leaf-strewn earth as they murmured curses, each pressing a makeshift bandage to fresh wounds. Suddenly, the snap of a twig echoed through the trees. One of the stone ninjas stiffened and glanced toward the undergrowth. "Who's there?" He barked, voice tense. His partner steadied himself and followed the gaze, but before he could answer, his eyes widened in shock. He froze where he stood. "What is it?" the first man hissed, leveling his kunai at the trees. In the clearing's dappled light, Nathan stepped into view, his dark cloak brushing the ferns at his ankles. A cold smile curved his lips as his piercing eyes met theirs. The two Iwa shinobi realized, in that instant, that their hidden enemy had found them first. The moment the Jonin caught sight of the crimson swirl of the Sharingan, the short sword at Nathan's hip, and the boy's youthful frame, he knew exactly whom he faced. His eyes widened, and he stumbled back, shouting, "The ghost sword! Nathan!" He tore his gaze away at once, senses flaring as he scanned for any blind spots. With each skirmish, the Hidden Rock village had meticulously studied Nathan's lightning-quick techniques, briefing their shinobi on his uncanny speed and unpredictable style. That was how he'd earned the nickname Ghost Sword. Nathan said nothing. If his methods were so transparent, so many Jonin wouldn't have fallen before him. The Chunin in front of him tightened his grip on his kunai, prepared to meet another ninjutsu assault. Instead of launching a projectile or drawing his blade, Nathan vanished with a burst of speed, reappearing right beside his opponent in a single, fluid motion of his body flicker technique. In that instant, he slipped his hands into the sequence of 7 seals, Shin, Cho, Yin, Zi, Shen, Wei, and summoned his signature jutsu, the chakra scalpel. A faint blue glow hummed into existence around Nathan's right palm. Before the Chunin could react, the invisible edge of chakra bit into his side, slicing through flesh and steel in a blink. Nathan didn't need to touch his opponent to shut him down. With a flick of his palm, the power of his chakra scalpel lanced through the air and severed the ninja's muscle fibers and chakra meridians. The Iwagakure Chunin stared in horror as his right arm went limp, hanging uselessly at his side. "What did you do to me?" he yelled, clutching at the useless limb. Nathan offered no reply. He slipped around to the man's flank and unleashed a second invisible blade. The Chunin twisted away just in time, but it was no help. Once again, Nathan's chakra edge struck true, and another part of his body went haywire, his feeble defense collapsing in a twisted, ineffective block. Seizing the opening, Nathan closed the distance in an instant. Their eyes met, and he quietly wove a hypnotic jutsu. In the next heartbeat, the Iwagakure ninja slumped to the ground in a deep sleep. Both Chunin lay incapacitated. Even though Nathan hasn't yet achieved Jonin rank, and many would brush off his abilities, he just defeated 2 ordinary Chunin in fewer than 10 moves, a performance few could hope to match. Nathan moved through the clearing with assured steps. Unless his opponents were Chunin on track for Jonin promotion, they stood no chance against him, just like the 2 Shinobi he'd already faced. With a quick glance, he struck out, knocking both unconscious with 2 well-placed blows. Before they could even register pain, he activated his chakra scalpel, severing the muscles and nerve connections in their limbs so thoroughly that escape became impossible. Satisfied, Nathan wove a hand seal and summoned a shadow clone. "Haul them away," he ordered the duplicate. As the clone lifted the 2 limp bodies and vanished into the forest, Nathan turned back to the perimeter. He wasn't done. Far from it. Now that he had momentum and the element of surprise, he intended to capture more prisoners. With each new captive, he'd gain more opportunities to train undisturbed. The hunt wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Chapter 188. Promotion. Thud. Thud. Boots pounded against mossy ground as Andino tore through the forest, adrenaline and dread racing in his veins. A rock ninja of the Hidden Stone and freshly promoted to Chunin, he'd been sent alongside 3 comrades on direct orders to harass the Konoha forces occupying their old stronghold. At first, everything had gone according to plan. They'd paid a small price, one of their number wounded, but in return they'd isolated and annihilated a Konoha Chunin and a Jinin who'd fallen behind. The bodies lay still. The mission, they thought, was a success. Then, just as they began to strip the fallen of weapons and prepare for a swift retreat, the forest fell unnaturally quiet. Out of nowhere, a lone figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. No war cry, no flash of light, just a steady, unblinking gaze. In a heartbeat, the stranger's presence alone felled Andino's strongest teammate, sending him crashing to the earth. Panic seized the survivors. They attacked, blades slashing, and yet the newcomer moved like a specter, vanishing from one spot and reappearing in the next. Every strike they landed was met with air where his body had been moments before. Within seconds, 2 more rock ninjas bit the dust, their limbs splayed in defeat. Andino's heart thundered. With only himself left standing, he finally understood the lethal skill arrayed against him. Hope vanished. His legs found a new gear as fear lent him speed, and he bolted into the thicket, leaving behind comrades and conquest alike. By the time Andino dared to glance over his shoulder, the clearing was empty, save for the chilling proof of a single warrior who'd objected to their raid. The forest reclaimed its hush, and Andino ran on, haunted by the knowledge that he had escaped, but his mission and his pride lay in ruins. Recalling the moments of the fight, Andino couldn't help but shiver. He ground his teeth and whispered, so it really was the wrong name, not just a bad nickname, Ghost Sword Nathan. Hatred and fear warred in his voice as he spat out the words. What do you want from me?" he stammered. A teasing chuckle drifted down from above. "Looking for me." Andino's heart leapt in his chest. He dropped into a sudden halt and stared upward. There, suspended in midair, were a pair of blood-red Sharingan eyes. In an instant, the world seemed to twist around him. An unbreakable illusion struck like a club, and Andino crumpled to the ground. Nathan landed lightly at his side, hands moving in a blur of precise seals. With a quiet incantation, he summoned a translucent blade of chakra, his signature chakra scalpel. In a single devastating motion, he severed the muscle fibers and nerve channels in Andino's limbs, rendering him utterly helpless. Nathan paused to survey his handiwork, then called over his shoulder, "All right, show yourselves." At his command, 2 shadow clones shimmered into existence. One clone bore 2 Iwa ninjas in its grip. The other held a third captive in its right hand. As Andino's gaze flicked between them, his eyes widened in horror. It was his own teammates, now at the mercy of the ghost sword. All four of us were finally gathered. Nathan handed Andino over to the second shadow clone. "You're dismissed," he said. "Stay sharp on the way out. Don't let anyone spot you." "Understood," the two clones answered in unison. Without another word, they faded into the darkness. Once they'd gone, Nathan scanned the clearing to make sure no one was watching and that he'd left no trace behind. Satisfied, he vanished into the night. Later, under cover of darkness, Nathan's true body slipped past the Konoha patrols and headed for his hideout, though hideout might be overstating it. It was really just a small, camouflaged cave carved into the mountainside. He'd tidied it up enough to be comfortable, 70 or 80 square meters, give or take. But he never intended to settle here long term. It was simply a safe place to regroup. Inside the cave, a lone figure materialized from the Thumbnaners Adaus. It was identical to Nathan. Of course, it was one of his shadow clones. The clone bowed its head respectfully, then dispelled its form. In an instant, it condensed into a swirling orb of chakra that surged into Nathan's mind, transmitting every detail of its mission. Nathan absorbed the memories in silence. Patrol routes, Konoha's latest deployments, and the weak point in their perimeter. When the last echo of chakra faded, he knew exactly what to do next. Nathan slipped into the cave after a quick scan of his captive's memories. Nothing unusual there. He halted by the 7 unconscious Iwagakure Chunin sprawled on the cold stone floor and allowed himself a satisfied nod. These weren't ordinary shinobi. If pushed to their limits, each could yield 7,000 to 8,000 points of chakra per day. But Nathan wasn't interested in killing them off. For sustainable harvesting, he'd cap the draw at 5,000 points apiece, netting 35,000 chakra daily. To put that in perspective, it nearly doubles the 21,000 points he naturally regenerates every 24 hours. 35,000 isn't an astronomical windfall, but it's far from insignificant. Properly allocated, it could accelerate his training and power far more quickly than his solo recovery ever could. Yet Nathan knew better than to rush into distributing these new reserves. It had been 10 days since he mastered the palm technique and the chakra scalpel. In that time, his chakra refinement technique had reached the brink of a breakthrough. First things first, upgrade refinement to level 5. Only then would he begin siphoning and assigning the captive's chakra each day. With that plan set, Nathan turned away from the unconscious bodies and prepared to advance his mastery, one deliberate step at a time. Nathan stepped into the training chamber reserved for his shadow clone, settled into a cross-legged posture, and silently activated the chakra refinement technique. He had mastered this skill long ago, and through daily repetition, now wielded it as effortlessly as moving an arm or flexing a finger. Focusing his mind, he drew wisps of physical energy from his cells, seamlessly blended them with spiritual energy, and condensed the fusion into countless chakra fragments. He then guided those fragments into his meridians, where they merged and circulated with his existing chakra. In that instant, Nathan became a detached observer, his thoughts entirely still as he watched the process unfold. Time seemed to stretch and slow, its passage undetectable. Then, without warning, a spark of insight jolted him. He perceived a deeper truth in the refinement sequence, and the moment the realization struck, the fusion of physical and spiritual energy surged forward. Refining the same amount of chakra now took less than half the time it once did. Nathan sensed something shift in his training. His chakra refining technique must have just advanced. He paused mid-meditation and opened his status panel to confirm. Sure enough, his chakra refining technique had leapt from level 4, 1,998 2,000, to level 5, 15,000. Reflecting on the recent session, he realized his active chakra recovery rate had more than doubled. What had been 800 chakra points per hour was now a staggering 2,000 points per hour. Likewise, his chakra absorption technique, used to draw in ambient energy, had its hourly cap raised from 16 points to 32. Of course, every gain comes with a cost. Level 5's refinement process placed a heavier burden on his body. Without boosting his physical fitness and spiritual attributes, he could sustain the technique for only 6 hours a day. Even so, the upgrade was monumental. His total daily chakra recovery jumped from 21,000 points to 27,000, while his maximum daily absorption climbed from 144 points to 192. Nathan closed the panel, a quiet satisfaction stirring within him. 6 extra hours of peak performance each day and a substantial reserve of chakra meant he was that much closer to mastering the next challenge. By my calculations, in about 6 weeks, Nathan could fully unlock his body's potential and raise his chakra ceiling to the theoretical 35,000 points, if only his inherent limits stayed fixed. But at the rate he's going, that's virtually impossible. His physique attribute is almost certain to climb before then. Over the past week, training with every ounce of strength he has, Nathan has already brought both his palm fairy technique and his chakra scalpel up to rank 4. His mastery of the palm fairy technique sits at 352,000 proficiency points, while the chakra scalpel has reached 25,000. Even now, when he channels Yang Escape Chakra through the palm fairy technique to reinforce his cells, he can feel the power growing more substantial with each use. All that remains is awaiting the moment his physique attribute finally levels up. Once that happens, the full path to his 35,000-point chakra limit will lie open before him. Chapter 189, Allocation and Planning. Nathan withdrew into himself and began allocating chakra. Including himself, the 7 prisoners have access to a total of 62,000 chakra points each day. After a moment's thought, he decided to devote 30,000 of those points to the Palm Immortal technique. At a rate of 200 proficiency points per day, this would rapidly boost his physical attribute, and since that attribute underpins all his future growth, he wasn't about to hold back. That left 32,000 chakra points. Nathan earmarked 15,000 of them and split that evenly among 3 jutsu: Fire Release, Great Fireball Technique, Fire Release, Dragon Fire Technique, and Wind Release, Great Breakthrough. He wanted the 2 fire techniques at maximum level as quickly as possible to enhance his combat effectiveness. At the same time, mastering the Great Breakthrough would deepen his control over Wind Nature Chakra, an essential step before progressing to Wind Release, Wind Blade, Wind Release, Spiral Shuriken, or even innovating his own Snap Sword technique. With this plan in place, Nathan felt confident his daily training regimen would yield steady, powerful gains. Nathan paused, reflecting on the instant sword technique and the 2 related arts he hoped to master next, the Shadow Sword technique and the Illusion Sword technique. The Shadow Sword technique still demanded unknown prerequisites, but the Illusion Sword technique was nearly within his grasp. He opened his skill panel and examined his progress. His Genjutsu Sharingan proficiency had already climbed past the halfway mark. At a training rate of 12,000 chakra points per day, he could push it to level 7 Perfection, 0, within a month. Once there, he could attempt to merge its illusionary power with his blade work, birthing the legendary Phantom Swordsmanship. That's the path, Nathan decided. With 5,000 chakra points remaining for daily distribution, he settled into meditation and weighed his priorities. He would devote 500 points to honing his swordsmanship and another 1,500 to mastering the Shadow Clone technique. Strengthening his sword skill was vital. If his Genjutsu Sharingan reached its zenith, but his blade work fell short, any attempt at phantom swordsmanship would end in failure. Having set his plan, he opened his chakra reserves and began his disciplined regimen. Nathan's next focus was to lay the groundwork for his ultimate technique, the Shadow Sword art. Central to that plan was mastering the Shadow Clone technique, but he couldn't afford to overuse it. Creating clones drained enormous amounts of chakra, and a single misstep could leave him critically weakened. He therefore practiced the clone jutsu sparingly, always preserving his main reserves. That left him with exactly 3,000 chakra points each day, and Nathan poured every bit into perfecting the Rasengan. He understood that this spiraling chakra sphere was the essential stepping stone to an S-rank ninjutsu, Wind Release, Rasen Shuriken, so he refused to neglect it. With his 62,000-point chakra pool fully allocated between the 2 disciplines, he moved on to the next challenge, timing. He couldn't remain hidden in the valley forever. Instead, Nathan resolved to leave a single shadow clone at the stronghold to give his enemies the false impression he still guarded it in person. The fortress lay deep inside Iwagakure's territory. Without full reinforcements, the attackers wouldn't risk a direct siege, but they would continue their hit-and-run raids, harassing patrols and supply lines just as they had all week. As a jonin, Nathan knew he couldn't sit this battle out. He had to be there in the thick of the fight. Now that Nathan's reputation had grown, he knew his opponents would never send a low-ranking shinobi to deal with him. The village would surely dispatch a jonin. If he relied on shadow clones in combat, he risked exposing himself and inviting questions from the Hokage's office. Worse, he wanted to test and sharpen his swordsmanship against a genuine foe, not mere illusions. He would have to face them in perso. That meant he couldn't afford to train haphazardly. He needed a precise schedule for honing each of his skills, and the right location for each. Nathan settled into a quiet corner of his hideout, legs crossed, and let the minutes slip by as he weighed his options. At last, a clear plan took shape. First, he would work on the less conspicuous techniques, the Genjutsu Sharingan, the Rasengan, and the Shadow Clone technique. These arts were powerful but silent and swift enough to practice covertly in his secret base. Then, when he had access to the fortress's expansive training grounds, he'd move on to his more explosive ninjutsu: Fire Release, Fireball Jutsu, Fire Release, Dragon Fire Jutsu, and Wind Release, Great Breakthrough. With this schedule in place, Nathan felt ready. Now all that remained was to refine each skill, prepare for the jonin sent to test him, and continue rising through the ranks, one flawless technique at a time. Nathan's 3 techniques together required only 15,000 chakra points, and he'd just recovered enough to cover them, so chakra shortages weren't a concern. The swordsmanship art, however, demanded lengthy practice and made far too much noise. He could only train it at the stronghold or on the battlefield. Fortunately, its chakra draw was minimal, and he could feed it either by siphoning from captives or from his own reserves, so there was no real worry there. The real challenge was the Palm Immortal technique. Though its exercises remained quietly contained, they consumed vast amounts of chakra and took considerable time to master. Simply raising his proficiency could be done quickly back at the secret base. But the technique also condensed the rare yang escape chakra needed to reinforce his body, and that chakra didn't dissipate immediately once used. From past experience, each round of bodily strengthening required about 3 full minutes. Nathan ran the numbers again. 200 repetitions meant 600 minutes. 10 straight hours of this one technique. Add in time for his other drills, and there simply wasn't enough room in his schedule, or in the secret base's day, to complete it all there. He had no choice but to split his training between the hidden hideout and the main stronghold. Yet, this technique burned through chakra at an astonishing rate, far beyond the 27,000 points he could regenerate in a day. Even worse, making frequent trips back to the secret base to recharge risked revealing its location, something Nathan would never allow. In the end, he settled on a 2-part routine. The first phase would take place in the secret base, where he'd compress his sleep to the bare minimum just to carve out enough training hours. The second phase would move to the stronghold, where he could supplement his limited chakra reserves without endangering the hideout's secrecy. With that plan in place, Nathan finally felt he might master the technique without blowing his cover. Nathan assessed his chakra reserves. Even after unleashing Fire Style, Great Fireball Technique, Fire Style, Dragon Fire Technique, Wind Style, Great Breakthrough, and intensive swordsmanship drills, he still had over 11,000 chakra points to spare, more than enough to alleviate the strain on his body. He decided to split his Palm Immortal technique training between the main base and the hidden facility. He exhaled, reviewed his training schedule one last time, and, satisfied, launched into his first practice session. A week passed in the blink of an eye. That evening, Nathan led his team back to the base after a routine patrol. With no pressing duties remaining, he set a shadow clone to stand watch and slipped away to the secret stronghold. Over the last 7 days, he had secretly captured 2 Obakure Chunin, extracting an additional 10,000 chakra points from them. Every drop of that energy was channeled into perfecting the Palm Immortal technique, and he'd even managed to compress his rest periods at the hidden base to squeeze out extra training time. By the end of the day, Nathan had wrapped up his rank advancement more than 24 hours ahead of schedule. His proficiency leaped from level 4, 352,000, to level 5, 25,000. As he drew on the technique that condenses yang chakra to fortify his body, he could tangibly feel his muscles and bones strengthening, an evolution of his physical core. Nathan calculated that, in roughly 2 weeks, his physique would undergo a breakthrough, boosting both his chakra ceiling and his chakra recovery rate. Brimming with anticipation for that transformation, he made his way into the facility's holding wing. One by one, he checked on the 9 prisoners secured there. Satisfied that each was securely restrained and showing no signs of trouble, Nathan cleared the area and resumed his step-by-step training regimen, keenly attuned to every shift in his burgeoning strength. Chapter 190, Birthday and Promotion. Half a month slipped by in the blink of an eye. The new year had dawned, and the Third Shinobi World War was now in its 3rd year. Today, January 5th, was Nathan's birthday, a rare occasion on which he could afford a full night's rest. Yet when he stirred the next morning, he felt different. "Did my stats just increase?" he muttered, flexing his hands and rolling his shoulders. Every part of his body felt stronger. Even his other abilities, senses, chakra control, reflexes, had all risen to new heights overnight. "No way that's just an illusion," Nathan said, a surprised grin spreading across his face. He took a steadying breath and spoke softly, "Show panel." Immediately, the pale blue interface he knew so well flickered into view before him. Uchiha Nathan age, physique, 12 spirit, 15, chakra, 26,500, up from 25,012, 29,236. Bloodline, Sharingan with 3 Magatama, 9,999, 10,000. Skills and techniques, chakra refining technique, level 5, 135, 5,000. Fire style, great fireball technique, level 4, 232,175, 2,000. Fire style, dragon fire technique, level 4, 210, 2,000, 1,680, 2,000. Wind style, great breakthrough or 3, 4, 502, 1,000, 1,020 for 2,000. Wind style, wind blade 1, 5,200. Shadow clone technique, level 2, level 3, 101, 4, 500 to 15. Chakra absorption technique, level 5, 1,235,000, 1,650, 5,000. Rasengan, level 3, level 4, 651,000, 310, 2,000. Palm magic technique V, 5, 25, 5,000, 4,050, 5,000. Chakra scalpel level 4, 25, 20,000, 2,100, 2,000. Genjutsu, Sharingan level 6, 5,045, 10,000, 430, 10,000. Heart reflection technique 7, 4,885, 20,000. Swordsmanship level 5, 2,300, 5,000, 4,450, 5,000. Chakra control level 4, 98, 2,000, 1.76, 2,000. 3-body technique level 3, body instant technique level 4, ninja tool throwing level 5, fire style, phoenix fire technique level 5, magic shackle technique level 5, healing technique level 5. Nathan flipped through the final readout and allowed himself a small smile. As expected, his physique had inched up by 1 point. Nathan's expectation had been largely confirmed. 15 days ago, he'd sensed a profound shift stirring within him, and today he saw the evidence. His physique attribute had risen from 11 to 12. What surprised him wasn't the increase itself, but its timing. He'd assumed the breakthrough would come during one of his intense Palm Immortal technique sessions when he drove his body cells to their limit. Instead, it happened quietly in his sleep. Replaying last night's rest in his mind, Nathan realized that his relentless training over the past 20 days might actually have delayed the transformation. Only when he finally stopped, relaxed, and let his body recover did the change occur. Age could have played a part too, but regardless of the reason, none of it would have been possible without those 20 days of preparation. The technique hadn't failed, it had merely waited for the perfect moment. "Next time," he murmured, "I'll have to balance intensity with rest." With that resolve, Nathan turned his attention to the other subtle enhancements brought on by his newly improved physique. Nathan watched the numbers in his mind settle, then replayed the calculations. Two major breakthroughs had just occurred. First, his theoretical chakra ceiling had jumped dramatically, from 35,000 to about 44,000 points. This 9,000-point boost came entirely from the improvement in his physique attribute, which had finally narrowed the gap with his spiritual attribute. With that gap closed, the mind suppression of the body eased, unlocking hidden reserves of spiritual power. In effect, the synergy between his physical and spiritual attributes raised his maximum chakra by 9,000 points in one fell swoop. Second, both his chakra regeneration rate and daily recovery volume had increased. By pushing physique from level 11 to 12, Nathan estimated his body could now recover roughly 4,000 more chakra points each day through natural healing alone. Iki's rise also strengthened his endurance under strain. Under his old stats, he could only maintain the chakra refinement technique for 6 hours a day, netting him 12,000 chakra points. Now he could push that technique for a full 7 hours, gaining an extra 2,000 points. All told, these advances not only gave Nathan a higher ceiling to draw from, but also a steadier, faster stream of chakra to fuel his next challenges. Nathan reviewed the figures. His total chakra capacity had jumped by 6,000 points. From now on, his daily chakra quota would rise from 27,000 to 33,000 points, a monumental increase that nearly equaled the output of those so-called chakra batteries. Thinking of those batteries, Nathan's mind drifted to the prisoners locked deep within the base. His relentless draining had already claimed the lives of the first 7 captives over the past 20 days. Fortunately, he'd captured replacements in time to keep their number at 9, ensuring his training regimen stayed on schedule. After weeks of steady effort, the results were undeniable. Not only had his physique attribute strengthened significantly, but his jutsu proficiencies had also soared. His mastery of fire style, great fireball technique and fire style, dragon fire technique, as well as wind style, great breakthrough, each increased by more than 400 points. The 2 fire techniques now teetered on the brink of perfection. Nathan's breakthrough into level 4 granted him a far deeper grasp of wind nature chakra, its shifts in form, its hidden potential. 2 of his signature techniques benefited immediately from this newfound insight. The Shadow Clone technique and the Rasengan each rose a full rank. The Shadow Clone technique jumped from level 2, 101,500, to level 3, 15,000. Nathan could now summon 10 clones instead of 5, and their stability had improved markedly. At the same time, the total chakra cost dropped from 9 points to 8, a small saving, perhaps, but one that would pay dividends in prolonged battles. His Rasengan also matured, advancing from level 3, 650, 1,000, to level 4, 310, 2,000. Its formation speed increased, and its power ceiling lifted in tandem, making each sphere of churning chakra that much more devastating. With both jutsu refined and his control over wind chakra sharper than ever, Nathan stood one decisive step closer to mastering the legendary wind release, Rasen Shuriken. Nathan estimated that once he perfected wind style, great breakthrough, and raised his Rasengan to level 5, his training would be nearly complete. But in truth, his biggest strides lately weren't just in those 2 techniques. They'd come in Genjutsu Sharingan, Palm Fairy technique, and Sword technique. His Genjutsu Sharingan proficiency now sat at level 6, 8,430, 10,000, just shy of the flawless level 7. The moment he advanced, he'd unlock the full power of the scroll's illusions, and ordinary Jonin would stand no chance against him. His sword technique had reached level 5, 4,455,000, only one promotion away from level 6. With that next breakthrough, he'd be ready to develop the Genjutsu sword technique, adding a deadly edge to his arsenal. Meanwhile, the Palm Fairy technique had climbed to level 5, 4,055,000, after days of relentless practice. At this rate, he'd hit level 6 in under 4 days, giving him yet another formidable skill to deploy when the time came. Nathan could sense the change stirring within him. By the time he completed his next cycle of training, his natural healing prowess would have grown exponentially, and the condensed yang release chakra, now flowing through his limbs, would reinforce his body like molten steel. If he continued on this path, his next transformation might not be far off. Chapter 191, Calculation. Nathan shook himself free from his daydream, closed the mission panel, and rose from his seat. He headed toward the wash area, and along the corridor he passed group after group of Konoha shinobi, each one bowing their head in greeting. He returned their salutes with a simple nod. It had been a month since everyone arrived at this forward base, and in that time, Nathan had fully earned his reputation as the Ghost Blade. His sudden, silent strikes had sent Iwagakure operatives fleeing in panic, while his presence alone bolstered the confidence of the mid-rank Konoha troops. On top of that, his mastery of medical ninjutsu had saved countless lives among the wounded. None of the other young ninja here treated him like a kid. They all respected what he'd accomplished, something even many Uchiha failed to achieve. Of course, such notoriety always drew attention, and Nathan's meteoric rise had made him a thorn in the side of certain power brokers. In the Land of Fire, within the hidden village of Konoha's root headquarters, Danzo scanned a fresh intelligence report. With every line he read, his expression turned grimmer. A few tense moments later, he slammed the document onto his desk. "What's going on with Uchiha Nathan?" he demanded, eyes narrowing. "Explain this to me. Why didn't you report this sooner?" The root operative before him stiffened, then dropped to one knee. "Sir, over the past weeks, we've concentrated our forces on the Land of Earth and the Land of Lightning. The few remaining operatives under my command received orders to monitor Uchiha Shisui first." Danzo held up a hand to cut him off. "Enough." With that, he set the ninja aside and turned to another dossier on his desk. The report detailed Shisui's recent activities. His prodigious speed in battle had earned him the nickname Shadow of the Instant Body. Danzo skimmed the pages, then snorted. Shadow of the Instant Body Shisui and Ghost Blade Nathan, the so-called Konoha twins. Quite an impressive reputation. He tapped the table in frustration. I should have eliminated them after the Chunin exams when the Weeping Rain squad failed to finish the job. A single Chunin team then might have sufficed. Now, these two have only grown stronger. Not even a handful of Jonin or members of Root can be dispatched on a whim. They've become too valuable, each holding critical posts. Danzo sighed, his eyes narrowing. These rising stars of Konoha had slipped through his fingers once. Now, neutralizing them would be far more complicated and far more dangerous. Danzo bit back an expletive under his breath. If Nathan and Shisui were just two more talented Uchiha prodigies, he wouldn't be sweating bullets. What set them apart wasn't merely their skill, but their temperament. Unlike their proud clanmates, Nathan and Shisui showed no arrogance. They integrated seamlessly with other Konoha shinobi, winning respect and forging the very bridge between the Uchiha and the village that Danzo dreaded. He had inherited the will of the second Hokage, Tobirama Senju, and with it a deep-seated distrust of the Uchiha. In his eyes, the clan was a ticking time bomb, destined to explode into rebellion. Better to strike first than to be caught off guard, he reasoned. Yet Nathan and Shisui's growing harmony threatened to postpone or even prevent that inevitable conflict. Danzo's knuckles rapped the table in a steady rhythm as he surveyed his options, mind racing through every contingency. Danzo sat in silence for a long moment before finally speaking. Recall half of our teams from the Land of Earth and the Land of Lightning. There's nothing urgent over there right now. Yes, sir, the Root Shinobi replied at once. Then, after a heartbeat, he asked, Are we sending them against Uchiha Nathan and Uchiha Shisui? Are you an idiot? Danzo snapped. Those two have grown far too dangerous. We can't use the same old tactics on them. He leaned back, steepling his fingers as he considered his next words. I want those teams back so they can keep Nath, Anne, and Shisui under constant surveillance. The Root Shinobi hesitated. He carried out orders without question, but he also knew this assignment was a rare chance to prove himself. Very well, sir, he said carefully. But what is the long-term plan for dealing with them? Danzo's lips curved in a faint smile, though his eyes were cold. Isn't it obvious, he murmured. They're the so-called Konoha twins. He stood, signaling the end of the discussion, leaving the root shinobi to wonder exactly what his leader had in mind. "Inform Orochimaru," Danzo ordered, his voice low and controlled. "Have him arrange transport for these two to the Kirigakure front." The Anbu operative from Root froze, then nodded as the implication sank in. "Understood, Lord Danzo." Everyone in the Hidden Leaf knew the shinobi of Kirigakure ranked among the finest of the 5 great nations. Their signature water style, Kirigakure technique, was notorious for neutralizing the Sharingan. Danzo's plan was obvious. Send Nathan and Uchiha Shisui into the Mist Village's territory and let Kirigakure eliminate them. No village welcomed geniuses from elsewhere, and the Hidden Mist would leap at the chance to strike at Konoha's rising stars. A discreet leak of tactical information, Danzo mused, and the 2 young prodigies would walk straight into a death trap. "Konoha's twins? Huh? Humph," he snorted, flinging the dossier onto the table. At that very moment, Nathan finished washing up, grabbed a quick bite, and set out on his daily mission, a routine patrol. Given his steadily growing strength, and provided he didn't do anything reckless or run into a particularly dangerous enemy, this kind of assignment posed little real threat. Sure enough, by day's end he hadn't encountered a single opponent. Instead, he spent the daylight hours honing his stamina and waited for the night's heavier training schedule. It was Nathan's birthday, but there'd be no celebration, only sleep, then back into relentless practice. In this world, where hidden agendas and unexpected ambushes loomed at every turn, one truth held firm: strength was everything. He couldn't afford to let his guard down. Days slipped by in a blur of missions, meals, rest, and non-stop drills. Nathan never learned the full scope of Danzo's secret plan, but he felt its weight in every task he undertook. Each night in the secret base, he tested himself, pushing beyond yesterday's limits. On the 4th night, he arrived as usual and began a systematic series of exercises. First came the Rasengan, a spinning ball of chakra he summoned with fluid hand seals and precise chakra control. After only a few attempts, he felt the technique click into place. Stable, powerful, ready for combat. Next, he turned his focus to the Genjutsu Sharingan. He closed one eye, tuned into the faintest currents of an opponent's mind, and practiced weaving illusions that could disorient even the most battle-hardened shinobi. With each repetition, the Sharingan's crimson glow burned brighter, its patterns sharper. By the time dawn's light crept in, Nathan's muscles ached and his chakras trembled, but his resolve was stronger than ever. In this unforgiving world, he would rise to meet every threat. Nathan had originally devoted 12,000 chakra points to his training each day. Since his physique attribute had improved, however, his daily chakra recovery increased by another 6,000 points, allowing him to pour a total of 18,000 points into his exercises. Progress was steady, if a bit slower than he'd hoped. After he'd brought both of his target skills up to the level he'd planned, his reserves were nearly drained. Not wanting to waste a moment, Nathan immediately set to work on the shadow clone technique. By the time he finally halted his practice, he had expended another 1,500 chakra points. He paused only briefly to catch his breath, then slipped down into the bowels of the base to employ his chakra absorption technique on several captives. In less than a minute, he had siphoned off nearly 30,000 chakra, fully replenishing every exhausted reserve in his body. With his energy restored, Nathan made his way back up to the training chamber, ready to resume his regimen. Chapter 192, Successive Promotions. Breathe, breathe. Nathan inhaled deeply, then exhaled in a slow, steady stream. Once his mind had settled, he prepared for the highlight of the evening, practicing the Palm Immortal technique. After more than 3 days of relentless training, he was finally on the verge of a breakthrough. If nothing unexpected occurred, tonight he would advance to level 7. He'd been eagerly anticipating the surge of purified Yang escape chakra that the level 6 form would condense, and the profound strengthening effect it would have on his body. Drawing all his focus inward, Nathan formed the prescribed hand seals and activated the Palm Immortal technique. He deftly corralled the condensed Yang escape chakra, channeling it through his meridians and directing it into every cell. Almost immediately, he felt the energy seep into his bones and muscles, reinforcing his flesh like molten steel. Moments stretched into minutes. 1, 2, 3. A tremor ran through Nathan's body as the chakra began to churn. He held his breath, maintaining perfect control even as the energy surged. Then, with a muffled roar of power, the chakra exploded outward, only to be contained by Nathan's iron will. Golden light rippled across his skin, bathing the room in a warm glow. When the radiance finally dimmed, Nathan opened his eyes. He could feel it. The Palm Immortal technique had matured. He'd done it. He stood at the threshold of level 7, but there was no time to rest. Riding this wave of newfound power, Nathan already felt the potential for further breakthroughs in his cultivation. One promotion had become the catalyst for the next. With calm determination, he prepared to push on, ready to claim the successive elevations that awaited him in the days to come. Nathan let the last traces of chakra fade before reforming his hand seal and unleashing the Palm Immortal technique again. He repeated this cycle every 3 minutes. Execute the technique, absorb the condensed yang-release chakra into his cells, then begin anew. Each repetition sharpened his mastery of the Palm Immortal technique while simultaneously fortifying his body with the pure yang energy. Despite the tedium, Nathan never felt it was a waste of time. First, every practice deepened his insight, revealing subtleties he'd missed before. Second, the powerful rush of strengthening chakra was so exhilarating that he couldn't bear to pause. Even mundane repetition felt worthwhile. So good, he murmured, tensing beneath the invigorating flow. Before long, night had fallen. Alone in the training chamber, Nathan formed the familiar seal one more time and released the Palm Immortal technique. This time, an even purer torrent of yang-released chakra surged through him, flooding every cell with warmth and power. An involuntary groan escaped him as the energy coursed through his veins, charging him with newfound strength. Nathan opened his eyes 3 minutes later, every new insight still fresh in his mind. He knew without a doubt that his Palm Immortal technique had just leveled up. The ultra-pure Yang Escape chakra he'd condensed with the level 6 version of the technique had at least doubled its body-strengthening effects. Nathan estimated that, within a month at most, his physical attributes would undergo a second breakthrough. That advancement would further close the gap between his physical and spiritual stats, unlocking even more potential and raising both his chakra ceiling and his chakra recovery rate. A surge of excitement warmed him, but he forced himself to stay calm. 1 month, that was plenty of time. With that assurance, he resumed his training plan and plunged back into practicing the level 6 Palm Immortal technique. Only when he'd spent all 40,000 chakra points he'd set aside for the day did he finally allow himself to rest. 4 hours slipped by in the blink of an eye. Nathan woke before dawn, blinking the last vestiges of sleep from his eyes. He shook his head to clear his thoughts, then slipped quietly into the lower levels of the base. There, he inspected the holding cells, 4 prisoners in all, confirming that each was secure. Satisfied, he dispatched a shadow clone to relieve the guard detail, then returned to his private chamber. Another day had begun. That afternoon, during a brief lull in operations, Nathan took up his training again. He focused on mastering fire-release fireball technique. Not far off, 3 of his Chunin subordinates practiced their own jutsu, unaware of what was about to happen. Nathan centered his chakra, traced the hand seals with practiced precision, and in a heartbeat his fireball coalesced. With a single, forceful exhale, he launched it. A thunderous explosion rocked the clearing as the blazing orb thundered into a massive tree, setting it ablaze. Embers flew skyward, and the 3 Chunin froze, shields raised in surprise. When they dared to glance over, Nathan's eyes were closed, his expression serene as he sifted through the sudden flood of insights that had come with the technique's release. After a moment, he opened his eyes, their amber glow alight with curiosity and resolve. "Is this the perfected fire-release, fireball technique?" he murmured. Raising his right hand, Nathan prepared to unleash whatever came next. Nathan closed his eyes and let the thought sink in. He could now form the hand seal with a single hand. Once a fire-release jutsu reached perfection and one's chakra control matured, even the most intricate seals, like those in the legendary fire-release Phoenix Immortal Fire technique, could be executed one-handed. "Captain, are you all right? What just happened?" 3 of his subordinates hurried over, concern written across their faces. Nathan shook his head, blinking back into the moment. "I'm fine," he said, forcing a casual smile. "I just made a little breakthrough." "Breakthrough?" They glanced toward the enormous tree in the clearing, its bark blackened and smoldering from his last demonstration. Nathan waved them off. "Don't worry about it. Carry on with your duties." After they left, he turned back to the training ground and assumed his stance for the fire release, dragon fire technique. As he molded his chakra, a familiar warmth coalesced in his palm. Moments later, his internal gauge, which had read +1+1, flickered up to +1+2. The extra bonus was unmistakable proof. By perfecting his fire release fireball technique, he'd unlocked new reserves of power. With that confirmation, Nathan smiled to himself and dove deeper into practice, eager to see what other heights his refined skill would reach. Nathan paused for a moment, wondering if the sudden leap in his skills was partly due to the fire release Phoenix Immortal fire technique. He quickly shook off the thought and refocused on his training. Until now, his proficiency in fire-style dragon fire technique and fire-style great fireball technique had been almost identical. But thanks to the Phoenix Immortal fire technique, the dragon fire technique had unexpectedly advanced ahead. Even better, it could now be executed with one hand, just like the great fireball. With that, Nathan had fully mastered all three of his fire-style ninjutsu. Each day, he managed to conserve 10,000 chakra points. Nathan decided to split them evenly. 5,000 points would go toward honing Vummer wind style, great breakthrough, accelerating its proficiency gain, and the other 5,000 points would be dedicated to wind style, windblade. Although great breakthrough hadn't yet reached the flawless level 5 state, and wouldn't provide a huge bonus to windblade immediately, this balanced approach would lay a solid foundation for both techniques. Despite the bonus, wind style, windblade, is inherently over a rank harder than wind style great breakthrough, so the extra reward won't be overwhelming. Nathan accepted that small trade-off. With an additional 5,000 chakra points fueling him, he was confident his wind style breakthrough would reach perfection within 5 days. And once that happened, any delayed bonus would catch up quickly. There was no reason to hesitate. More than half an hour later, Nathan wrapped up his practice of wind style breakthrough, boosting his proficiency by 65 points. After a short rest, he called in 3 subordinates for sparring to sharpen his swordsmanship. A recent shortage of worthy opponents had slowed his progress, and he'd hoped to hit level 6 today. Now it looked like he'd have to wait until tomorrow. Even so, having training partners at all meant he could keep moving forward. Anything was better than stalling entirely. Anyone who trained with Nathan only stood to gain. With his steadily improving swordsmanship, even beginners who learned just the basics found enormous benefit, and those uninterested in the blade still walked away with valuable combat experience. So whenever Nathan extended an invitation to spar, no one refused, and in turn, his own skill continued to grow. Chapter 193. Abnormal Clang. Clang, clang. Metal rang sharply through the quiet forest as Nathan, short sword in hand, squared off against 3 of Chunin Shisui's subordinates. He moved with effortless precision, dodging, parrying, then riposting in fluid succession, never once looking overwhelmed. After 15 minutes of brisk exchanges, he spotted his chance. With a flick of his hips, he delivered 3 swift kicks in succession. Thud, thud, thud! All 3 opponents hit the ground hard. One of them, a wiry youth no more than 16, groaned as he pushed himself up on one elbow. "Captain," he complained with a wry grin, "can't you go easy on us? You always hit like a freight train." The others burst into laughter. They knew Nathan's strength well enough. If he'd really unleashed his full power, they'd be broken bones instead of bruised egos. And under his command, their medical ninjutsu drills were legendary. He could give you a lesson you'd never forget, then heal you as if it had never happened. Nathan smiled and was about to tease them back when a sudden breeze whipped through the trees. In the clearing's fringe, a lone figure shot forward at incredible speed. Nathan's eyes narrowed in recognition, one of Nara Shisui's personal guards, a seasoned Chunin arriving on urgent feet. Nathan stood at the command post, serving as the liaison between the Jonin, Nara Shisui, and the field operatives. His 3 subordinates, equally tense at the unusual urgency in the air, hovered nearby, waiting for instructions. A breathless messenger arrived moments later, his cloak dusted with the aftermath of battle. "Sir," the messenger gasped, bowing deeply, "the northwest defense line has collapsed. A rock ninja contingent, nearly 100 strong, broke through and is now advancing on the fortress. Narration has ordered you to lead our unit in immediate reinforcement. We must stop them before they breach the inner walls." Nathan's brow furrowed. "I thought the rock ninja forces had stalled their offensive recently. What could have prompted such a sudden, large-scale push?" The messenger shook his head, voice tight with uncertainty. "We don't know, sir. They moved faster than anyone expected." Nathan pressed his lips together, weighing the implications. Then, with a curt nod, he dismissed the man. "You're free to go. I'll organize departure in 5 minutes." The messenger saluted and hurried off, leaving Nathan's team to spring into action. As the wind carried the distant echo of battle cries, Nathan rallied his subordinates. There was no time to lose. They would meet the enemy head-on, outside the fortress walls, before it was too late. Nathan watched the lone figure vanish into the distance, then turned to the 3 shinobi standing behind him. "Suit up. We move out now." "Yes, Captain," they replied in unison, quickly inspecting their weapons and gear. Nathan, meanwhile, ran a mental check on his own condition. Aside from physical wariness, his chakra reserves were still remarkably high, thanks to his disciplined training habit of keeping chakra flow and recovery evenly balanced. Even after just unleashing Fire Style, Great Fireball Technique, Fire Style, Dragon Fire Technique, and Wind Style, Great Breakthrough, which together could have drained less prepared shinobi, he felt as ready for battle as ever. That confidence steeled him for whatever lay ahead. Within 10 seconds, the team was in formation. Nathan led them forward. A few hundred meters out, the battlefield revealed itself. A vast, sun-scorched plain where heat waves danced in the air, making the ground shimmer as if it were a molten sea. Under that blistering sky, their mission was about to begin. Dozens of Hidden Leaf shinobi and nearly 100 from the Hidden Rock village clashed, turning a 1-kilometer radius into a war zone. Caught off guard and glaringly outnumbered, Konoha's forces were on the brink of collapse. Only the steady arrival of reinforcements, teams like Nathan's, had kept the front from crumbling entirely. Yet even with these backups odds, it was clear their position wouldn't hold for much longer. Nathan glanced across the field, puzzled. What made this assault so overwhelming? The rock shinobi weren't raw recruits. There were almost no Jainin among them. Most were Chunin, and a substantial number were Jonin. Where had Iwagakure mustered such a seasoned force so quickly? Before he could draw a conclusion, a squad of Hidden Rock Chunin broke through the melee and charged straight at him. Their faces were etched with grim determination, until one of them caught sight of Nathan. The young Chunin's fierce smile faltered and then vanished altogether. He froze on the spot, eyes wide with palpable terror. It wasn't the Sharingan in Nathan's gaze compelling him to stop. It was simple, utter fright at the sight of him. Nathan's crimson Sharingan flared to life as his sharp gaze swept over the 3 Iwagakure operatives charging toward him. In a blur of motion, he wove the requisite hand seals, unleashing a potent hypnotic genjutsu. The shinobi leading the charge froze mid-stride, eyes rolling back as the illusion took hold, and collapsed to the ground like a lifeless puppet. The remaining 2 exchanged panicked glances and stumbled backward, desperately trying to evade what they still couldn't fully comprehend. But they were too slow. With the speed of lightning, Nathan formed a second seal and layered on a flawless illusion Sharingan. One of the men froze in place, trapped within Nathan's mindscape. In the next heartbeat, Nathan materialized before him. His short sword flashed free of its sheath, and with a chilling whisper of steel, he severed the stunned shinobi's neck. Before the third enemy could register what had happened, Nathan had already vanished into his blind spot. A muted gasp, a single grunt, and a blade driven straight through the heart from the shadows marked the end of the final attacker. Moments later, quiet settled over the battlefield. 3 fallen shinobi lay motionless, testament to Nathan's deadly precision and mastery of the Sharingan. He allowed himself a brief, coldly satisfied breath before slipping away into the night. Nathan's blade had cut down 2 shinobi and seized control of a third in the blink of an eye. The Iwagakure Chunin, frozen in terror, let out a panicked scream, and spurred on by pure fear, turned to flee. In doing so, he foolishly exposed his back to Nathan. With cold precision, Nathan drew a kunai from his pouch and hurled it. There was a soft puff of displaced air as the blade flew more than 10 meters, embedding itself squarely between the man's shoulder blades. The Chunin crumpled to the ground, lifeless, but the dying man's scream had already drawn nearby Iwagakure ninja. One voice cut through the tension. "The ghost sword is here! The ghost sword is here!" Like a clarion call, it summoned 2 jonin racing to the scene. Among them, Yin raised her stance and leveled a fierce gaze at Nathan. He wasn't surprised. Ever since earning his fearsome reputation, the Hidden Rock village had stopped sending low and mid-ranking shinobi against him. Now, they came with their true warriors. Nathan's reputation among the Hidden Rock's lower and mid-rankers was already fearsome. His swordsmanship was so overwhelming that single encounters often ended in instant defeat. To prevent needless casualties, anytime he appeared on the battlefield, those weaker ninjas would flee rather than face him and send up a distress signal to their jonin. As soon as the call went out, at least 2 jonin were dispatched immediately to handle Nathan. Sure enough, almost the moment the alert sounded, 2 jonin from Hidden Rock came sprinting toward Nathan's position. He glanced at them, measured the thickness of their chakra signatures in an instant, and murmured under his breath, "2 special jonin, huh?" Satisfied he could handle them, Nathan turned to the 3 shinobi lingering behind him. "I've got this," he said calmly. "You 3 go assist the others." "Yes, Captain," they chorused, scattering to help where they were needed. Fro, Mem 50 paces away, the 2 jonin exchanged a quick look and a barely perceptible nod. This was the chance they'd been waiting for, a prime opportunity to test themselves against the village's rising star. With their mind made up, they charged forward, chakra crackling at their fingertips, and determination in their eyes, ready to bring Nathan down. Without hesitation, the 2 of them sprang into action, each hurling several shuriken, some to cut off Nathan's escape routes, and others aimed straight for his vital points. Chapter 194. Bureau swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Nathan felt the faint whisper of air behind him, and allowed a small, satisfied smile to play at the corners of his lips. He deliberately left his back exposed, bait too tempting for any cautious shinobi to ignore. As expected, the 2 rock ninjas couldn't resist. Blades flew past him in a deadly arc. But the moment their shuriken struck, Nathan pivoted. His Sharingan flared to life, the 3 tomoe in each eye spinning as they calculated every missile's trajectory. In a heartbeat, he rammed his foot into the ground and launched himself forward like a human cannonball. The shuriken storm that had seemed so perfectly placed splintered into chaos around him. Nathan weaved through the rain of steel, his movements a blur under the insight of his Sharingan. Then, seizing the opening he'd created, he closed the distance to his adversaries in an instant. By the time the 2 rock ninjas recovered, Nathan was already in their midst. With a swift, fluid motion, he swung his short blade in a deadly arc, precise, unstoppable, and utterly decisive. Nathan's plan unfolded in a single fluid motion, no hesitation, no pause, and he achieved exactly what he'd set out to do, seize the initiative. That was the whole point. He'd deliberately taken a long, winding route to bait the rock ninja scouts into firing the first shot. Once they broke cover, he would counterattack, dictate the pace of the fight, and force his allies to follow his lead. He couldn't afford a drawn-out standoff. The rock ninjas were already too numerous and too skilled. Any delay risked reinforcements arriving and overwhelming them. By striking first, Nathan erased any room for doubt. No one in his team would hesitate once the battle was underway. This was his moment. If he could eliminate 1 or 2 scouts now, he'd lighten the burden on his comrades for the clashes still to come. Nathan was certain that beyond these 2 lay an even larger force. Planning ahead and acting preemptively were the only ways to survive what waited in the shadows. Nathan's mind buzzed with fleeting thoughts, but he forced himself to focus on the 2 opponents before him. The clash of kunai and short sword rang out, clang, 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 as he drew his blade and they met each strike. At first glance, the duel seemed evenly matched, neither side gaining the upper hand. Yet appearances were deceiving. Even fighting together, they hadn't managed to outmaneuver his Sharingan illusions, and he still couldn't rely on simple vision-blocking tricks. More importantly, Nathan's swordsmanship, nearly level 6, was no ordinary skill. If he unleashed his full strength, he was confident he could defeat both adversaries head-on, but doing so would expend too much energy and time. Instead, he deliberately showed a crack, deliberately maintaining an even fight to lull them into complacency. He would wait patiently, then strike the moment their guard dropped, and end this battle swiftly. Seconds stretched on as steel met steel, each passing heartbeat bringing him closer to the decisive moment. Nathan lunged backward, just in time, the jonin from Iwagakure's blade whistling past his throat. He pivoted on his left foot and leaned sharply to the right, watching a second jonin's blade stab where his heart had been moments before. As he landed, he told himself silently, perfect opening. In an instant, he awakened his fully matured 3-tomo Sharingan. The world seemed to stutter as crimson patterns danced in his vision, and he struck at the jonin before him with a subtle genjutsu, hoping to seize his mind. But both opponents were on guard against the famed eye techniques of the Uchiha. Even as the first jonin's pupils began to glaze over, the second sensed the shift. Without hesitation, he hurled himself at Nathan with a relentless flurry of strikes, partly to shatter the illusion, partly to buy his partner time to recover. Nathan recognized their ploy. It wasn't the right moment to press his advantage further. His goal was to create a distraction, not to get drawn into a prolonged duel. He let the genjutsu fade and met the oncoming assault with a handful of deflecting parries, stepping away before the jonin could land a telling blow. Seeing Nathan break off, the second jonin finally allowed himself a low, relieved breath. The chance had slipped through Nathan's fingers for now, but the battle was far from over. Nathan stood motionless, Sharingan eyes locked on his captive. The Iwagakure jonin, recently ensnared by Nathan's genjutsu, stirred and blinked awake. As their gazes met, the jonin instinctively looked away. That split-second hesitation was all Nathan needed. He summoned his full willpower, activated his Sharingan, and sent the hypnosis rippling toward the man still fighting ahead. Instantly, that jonin froze, mid-strike. Nearby, the newly awakened jonin realized his blunder and whipped his eyes back to Nathan, tossing a kunai with desperate force. But Nathan was already moving. In one fluid motion, he drove his dagger through the first jonin's chest, the steel burrowing deep into flesh and spine with a wet, echoing thud. The moment the blade struck home, the frozen warrior collapsed, and as though a switch had flipped, the hypnosis shattered. The man gasped, eyes clearing, free at last from Nathan's control. Nathan stared down at the dagger protruding from his chest, confusion clouding his vision. He lifted his gaze to the rock-hidden ninja standing a few paces away, trying to form words, but instead a gush of blood burst from his lips. Nathan staggered backward, the world tilting, then slid off to one side. With a swift, practiced motion, he seized the blade and ripped it free. Deprived of its anchor, the ninja's balance gave way. He lurched forward, took 2 unsteady steps, and collapsed, life draining from him in a ragged gasp. Under normal circumstances, Nathan knew this opponent wouldn't have fallen so easily. But the ninja's previous attack had been a reckless sacrifice, a desperate ploy to buy time for his comrades, leaving him completely exposed. If the other hidden ninjas had rallied at once, Nathan would have been hard-pressed to turn the tide. Yet when they stirred, they merely glanced his way and looked away. Their hesitation, and Nathan's careful planning, had granted him exactly the opening he needed. After all, it was he who had engineered their misstep from the start. Early in the previous skirmish, Nathan had quietly studied the 2 Iwagakure jonin through his Sharingan, noting every hesitation and fighting habit. He soon realized that one of them was deeply unsettled by the mere sight of his eye. Time and again, the jonin's gaze flickered away, a telltale sign of his fear. Sensing an opening, Nathan laid his trap. As the battle resumed, Nathan danced through their attacks, baiting them into overcommitting. Then, at the precise moment, he activated his Sharingan's hypnotic power. In an instant, the more fearful jonin was caught in his trance, his dread of the cursed eye intensifying tenfold. When the jonin finally snapped out of it, he found Nathan repositioned at his flank, the weight of his own terror bearing down on him. Driven by instinct, he looked away once more. an act of self-preservation that left his partner exposed and endangered. Though he managed to recover in time, his strike still missed its mark. Nathan didn't hesitate. Seizing the opening, he poured every ounce of his strength into a counterattack. In a single, devastating blow, he felled his opponent and achieved exactly what he'd set out to do. Chapter 195, Siege. Damn it, Kurota! Oda Uchiko's shout rang through the clearing as he watched Nathan's blade finish off his companion. Anger and desperation drove him forward. He lunged at Nathan without a second thought. Even together, though, the two attackers were no match for Nathan's speed and precision. In fewer than 50 strikes, Nathan had carved thin, stinging cuts across Oda's armor. Bleeding but unbowed, Oda pressed on. Nathan didn't hesitate to press his advantage. After just a dozen more exchanges, Nathan spotted an opening that would have crippled his opponent, when suddenly the ground beneath his feet began to writhe. Sensing the shift, Nathan pulled back instantly. He tapped the earth with his toes and leapt to safety just as the soil collapsed into a sucking bog. Had he remained a moment longer, the swamp would have swallowed him whole. "Who's there?" Nathan barked, scanning the tree line. Only silence answered him. Whoever laid this trap remained hidden, at least for now. Nathan barely had time to spot his attacker when his feet hit the ground, and a jagged spike of stone shot up beneath him, aimed straight for his heart. The ambush came in the same instant the swamp jutsu dissipated, a lethal 1-2 punch that would fell any ordinary shinobi. But Nathan wasn't ordinary. His Sharingan flared to life, heightening his reflexes beyond human limits. In the split second he saw the spike emerge, he sprang into a double backflip, vaulting clear of the strike. All it left was a shallow scratch. Before he could land again, a second spike erupted. Then a third, a fourth. He bounded across the muddy clearing like an acrobat, covering more than 10 meters in a series of fluid dodges. Each time the earth cracked open beneath him, he was already airborne, narrowly avoiding dozens of rock thorns that burst from the ground in rapid succession. From the shadows, the attacker's cloak billowed as he retreated a step. Realizing his rock jutsu couldn't trap, or even slow, he let the chakra drain from his technique and fell silent. Nathan touched down in a low crouch, eyes scanning the gloom for any sign of movement. The battle had only just begun. Nathan relaxed the instant he saw no more jagged rock spikes erupting around him. The assault hadn't truly threatened him, but ceding the initiative left a bitter taste. He also knew another Iwa shinobi lurked somewhere in the shadows. He couldn't afford to let his guard down. Clearly, two opponents were working in tandem, one summoning the stone thorns, the other soaking the earth into a swamp. Their strikes were too well coordinated for a single ninja. Hand seals simply take too long to execute twice in rapid succession. Before he could sort out more, a razor-sharp arrow of water screamed toward him from the distance. Nathan's reflexes were quicker. He dropped to one knee the moment he sensed danger, and the water projectile whistled past his arm, embedding itself deep in the trunk of a massive tree. Even from the impact, he knew it was a high-level water-release ninjutsu. He turned back to face the archer and saw a rock specialist standing just beyond the clearing, arms crossed over his chest, jaw hanging open in surprise. No doubt about it, the water arrow had been his masterpiece. Nathan's gaze wasn't fixed solely on his current opponent. Not far away, a rock-style shinobi crouched low, his palms brushing the cracked earth as if he'd just completed a jutsu. Coupled with the sudden eruption of jagged stone thorns that had nearly impaled him, Nathan knew at once this was the same ninja who'd ambushed him with the escape and shadow spear technique. 2 jonin? He swept his eyes over both men. The sheer volume of chakra they each carried far exceeded that of any chunin he'd ever faced. One was clearly this earthbender, almost certainly a special jonin, while the other, Koda Uchiko, had just been pushed to the brink by Nathan's last attack. So they'd sent 2 jonin and a special jonin after him. They really did think highly of him. Nathan didn't wait for them to finish encircling him. With a sudden burst of speed, he lunged straight at Koda Uchiko. Better to disarm the weakest link now than to deal with all 3 later. Of the trio, Koda was the easiest mark, and the one most recently reminded of Nathan's power. Nathan sized up his opponent. Badly wounded and bleeding, an easy target. 2 figures lingered at the edge of the clearing, but he barely spared them a glance. The shinobi from both sides were already locked in close-quarters combat. Nobody could risk unleashing a large-scale jutsu in the chaos. Even if those distant foes tried a minor trick, Nathan knew he could dodge it, so he chose to focus on the man before him. Odachi met Nathan's approach head-on. Instead of diving for cover, he charged forward, weapon at the ready. Nathan's eyes flickered in surprise. He'd expected his adversary to falter once reinforcements arrived. Clearly, the death of the Iwa shinobi moments ago had steeled Odachi's resolve far more than Nathan had anticipated. Silently, Nathan drew in chakra, bracing himself behind his blade. With a fluid motion, he struck. Yet even as the steel cut through the air, one thought raced through his mind. But he wouldn't let anything, surprise, pain, or the two shadowy figures, distract him now. If you don't have the strength, no matter how hard you fight, it's pointless. Clang, clang, clang! The clash of metal rang out like a sudden downpour, relentless and rapid. Nathan unleashed himself, calling on his level 5, almost level 6 swordsmanship at full force and pushing his evolved 3-tomo Sharingan to its limit. He easily overwhelmed his opponent. In a single, fluid motion, his blade cut deep, scoring a fresh wound across Odane Hikaru's side. Odane grunted, swinging his kunai up to parry the dagger. He planted his foot, kicked back, and put a few yards between them. He glared at the new cut on his left arm, scowling. It wasn't Nathan's strength that unnerved him. He'd expected to get hurt. He knew he couldn't match Nathan one-on-one. What truly stung was realizing how much Nathan had held back before. This display of raw power made it clear. Nathan had never fought at full strength against them, until now. Kurita Ozawa's death, brought on by his own mistake, weighed heavily on his surviving allies. Their faces were etched with guilt and anger as they glared at Nathan, but he barely noticed. The moment Ozawa's partner faltered and tried to pull back, Nathan pressed the advantage. Steel rang against steel as his kunai collided with the other man's dagger, sparks dancing off the blades. Nathan forced a step forward, seeking an opening for the finishing strike, but before he could exploit it, two more Iwagakure shinobi slipped in from the flanks. They had observed from a distance, tested Nathan with probing feints, and found his defenses too solid to break with mere trickery. Now they closed ranks, determined to overwhelm him by strength of numbers. Nathan halted mid-advance. He could have unleashed a jutsu, an earth barrier to split his foes, or a thick smoke cloud to shroud his escape, and scattered their formation. That would guarantee his safety. But he resisted. His kenjutsu was on the brink of a breakthrough. Level 6 was tantalizingly close. If he risked everything in this very fight, he might force the upgrade he'd been striving for. He weighed the danger in a heartbeat. Yes, the gamble was deadly, but he believed he could endure it. With quiet resolve, Nathan readied his blade once more, preparing to turn this 3-on-1 ambush into the crucible that would propel his swordsmanship to new heights. Nathan only dared to attempt such a bold move because he had complete confidence in his own strength. He knew that even if the unexpected happened, he could rely on sheer force to turn the tide of battle in his favor. Fueled by that conviction, he didn't hesitate to hone his swordsmanship on the spot, quite literally using his enemy's own hands to master each strike. Chapter 196, Upgrade Clang. The sharp ring of steel echoed across the training ground as Nathan parried yet another coordinated attack from the 3 Iwagakure Jonin. He wielded only a short blade, but despite being outnumbered, he never gave an inch. A few minutes ago, when their tacit teamwork had caught him off guard, he'd almost been overwhelmed more than once. During that time, he'd attempted to break free with ninjutsu, but each effort was met with crushing suppression. Ultimately, he'd fallen back on the one thing he knew would see him through, his swordsmanship, bolstered by the insights of his Sharingan. Under the relentless pressure of life-or-death combat, Nathan's skill with the blade had skyrocketed. Every parry, every slash felt sharper and more precise than the last. As he blocked a vicious downward strike, a thrill of realization surged through him. It was happening faster than he ever imagined. It's quick, so quick, he thought, heart pounding, sweat stinging his eyes. Across from him, the 3 Iwagakure Jonin hesitated, exchanging confused glances. Their perfectly timed assault had begun to unravel. They didn't understand what Nathan was murmuring, but they sensed the shift in momentum. Meanwhile, Nathan's gaze flicked around the field, wary of any new threat. He knew this skirmish marked only the beginning of his true trial, and he was ready to meet it head-on. Nathan felt the weight pressing down on him suddenly lift, and he frowned. But when he met the stunned expressions of the three shinobi before him, he wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. What on earth was happening? He'd only whispered a few random words. Were they really treating him with this much caution? Despite his confusion, Nathan recognized the opportunity. 2 quick taps of his kunai, ding ding, sent the strikes of the 2 Iwagakure Jonin clattering aside. Then, as Mitsuru Odauchi launched a surprise flank attack, Nathan didn't fully dodge. Instead, he twisted just enough to shield his vital points and sprang into a precise counterblow. Mitsuru's eyes went wide. Staggering back, he attempted to retract his blade, half convinced Nathan's feint was meant to sow discord among them, yet pausing now risked an even worse fate. In that heartbeat, Mitsuru's mind flashed to Kurota Ozawa, who'd fallen because of his own hesitation. Gathering his resolve, he averted his focus from Nathan's incoming strike and pressed on with renewed ferocity, determined to finish the fight before he, too, paid the ultimate price. Nathan watched in surprise as his opponent, Oda Uchiko, lowered his guard, betting everything on his teammates to shield him from a lethal strike. Quite a bold move. Nathan had expected Oda to protect himself, but instead the young shinobi was willing to share death with him. It was precisely the right choice to complicate Nathan's plans. Had Oda simply blocked, Nathan was confident he could have dispatched him in a handful of swift moves. Now, however, things had grown thornier, but far from impossible. With a deliberate drag of his blade, Nathan slowed his assault. He pivoted just enough to let Oda's swing sail past harmlessly. That split-second hesitation brought 2 Iwagakure Jonin into play. One leapt forward and intercepted Oda's weapon, knocking it aside. The other lunged at Nathan, hurling a gleaming kunai aimed straight for his throat. Nathan felt the metal's cold promise of death slice through the air. He had no time to parry. Instead, he snapped his dagger inward, stripped it from its sheath mid-spin, and dove back. The kunai whistled past his neck, grazing the collar of his jacket. Breathing steadily, Nathan rolled to his feet, dagger in hand. The battlefield had shifted, but his plan remained intact. One of the Iwagakure Jonin, who had just blocked Oda Uchiko's strike, seized the moment and lunged at Nathan with a kunai aimed straight for his throat. In a blur, Nathan twisted aside and, drawing his sword in one fluid motion, cut back at his attacker. His blade's arc carried on to include the Jonin standing beside. Metal rang twice as their weapons met his. That clang of steel marked Nathan's momentary advantage. He slipped his sword free and launched into a flurry of strikes that served as both attack and defense, fanning out in unpredictable patterns to keep all 3 opponents off balance. Each parry flowed immediately into a counter, sometimes 2 or even 3 at once, so that, though outnumbered, it seemed as if Nathan had 3 allies fighting at his side. Blow after blow rattled through the clearing. Dozens of moves later, sweat beading on his forehead, Nathan's rhythm finally faltered under the relentless pressure. The 3 Iwagakure Jonin seized the opening and broke free from his whirlwind defense. By Nathan's own design, it was Oda Uchiko who slipped clear first, and without hesitation, Uchiko charged, eyes blazing as he prepared to strike. Seeing the blade aimed straight for his heart, Nathan wondered, is this really how it ends? He abandoned his attempt to pin down the other 2 assailants, sheathed his sword, and readied himself to intercept. Recognizing that his surround way, rescue Jiao gambit had succeeded, Oda Uchiko launched an even more furious onslaught, hoping to carve out an opening for his allies. But in the heat of that savage assault, his own guard slipped. 3 Magatama beads spun in Nathan's vision, locking onto Oda's attack trajectory. Drawing on the enemy's familiar fighting patterns, he anticipated the follow-up strike before it even materialized. As Oda's blade arcs toward him, Nathan slid his body aside, just as his foe had expected. Oda flicked his wrist to redirect the blow, only to find Nathan already gone. Seizing the momentary gap, Nathan thrust his dagger forward. It shot out like a coiled viper, striking with lethal precision the instant it cleared its hiding place. "Careful!" An Iwagakure Jonin shouted as he spotted an incoming strike, lunging forward to warn Oda Uchiko and brandishing his kunai to intercept the blow. Last time, his defense had been pierced, but Nathan never meant to maim his opponents today. Before the attacker could swing again, Nathan's head snapped around as if by instinct. Their eyes locked for a single heartbeat, and in that instant, Nathan activated the hypnotic power of his fully evolved 3 Magatama Sharingan. Even a simple gaze from such a dojutsu was enough to shatter an ordinary shinobi's will. As if struck by paralysis, the first Iwagakure Jonin froze in mid-movement. His eyelids fluttered shut, and he sank to his knees in a deep, unbreakable sleep. Across the clearing, another Iwagakure Jonin, Odauchi Hikaru, had been preparing to ambush Nathan. Now deprived of his planned opening, Hikaru threw himself at Nathan in a hasty, half-hearted slash meant more to threaten than to harm. Then he spun away to rouse his comrade. But Hikaru had committed his full weight to that swing. By the time he whirled back, Nathan's composure was ironclad, his Sharingan still trained on him, ready to thwart any last-ditch attack. Nathan met Hikaru's desperate gaze and plunged the dagger home, driving it deep into the man's chest. Hikaru twisted and writhed, desperately trying to twist away from the blade's path, but Nathan's strikes seemed guided by an unseen intelligence. With a final sickening thrust, the dagger found its mark, piercing heart and lung in one clean motion. A spray of blood spurted from Hikaru's lips as Nathan slid aside and withdrew the weapon. Deprived of his strength, Hikaru staggered 2 steps, eyes widening in shock, before collapsing to the floor in a lifeless heap. In that instant, a pulse of energy rippled through Nathan's mind. He didn't need to open his skill menu to know what had happened. His swordsmanship had just advanced to level 6. Drawing on the surge of power, he realized he could now fell 3 more opponents with the same effortless precision. Unfortunately, there was no one left to face. Nathan glanced down at Odauchi Hikaru's body lying motionless on the ground. He casually flicked the blood from his blade, then shifted his attention to the 2 Iwagakure Jonin standing a short distance away. The one who had been under his hypnosis had just come to, and when their eyes met, a flicker of alertness passed through the Jonin's gaze. It was hardly surprising. Nathan's Sharingan was devastatingly powerful. He'd faced Uchiha Jonin before, but he'd never subdued one so decisively with nothing more than a hypnosis technique. Ichiro Fukui's instincts screamed that Nathan's Sharingan was anything but ordinary. Chapter 197, Suppression. Nathan didn't know, and didn't care, what Fukui Ichiro was up to. All he wanted now was someone worthy enough to test his level 6 swordsmanship. With that single thought driving him, he sprinted toward the 2 Iwagakure Jonin stationed a short distance ahead. Fukui Ichiro's eyes flicked to Nathan's rapid approach. He drew a kunai and hissed to his partner, "Yoto, watch his eyes." "I've got it," Yoto Iwama replied with a solemn nod. He wasn't about to underestimate Nathan. He'd seen how effortlessly Fukui had fallen under the newcomer's spell. Something about Nathan was far from ordinary. With a sharp whistle, Yoto unleashed a volley of kunai aimed for Nathan's vital points. Instantly, the Magatama in Nathan's pupils whirled into action, locking onto each kunai's trajectory and calculating the perfect evasive path. Nathan dropped his weight, tapped the ground, and weaved through the blades in a series of fluid sidesteps, never breaking his forward stride. Yoto smirked beneath his headband. He hadn't expected such a simple feint to trip Nathan up, but that was the whole point, buying precious seconds for Fukui Ichiro's real attack. Nathan's short sword rang sharply as it met Ichiro Fukui's kunai. Sparks flew where blade met blade, the clash echoing across the courtyard. For a heartbeat, neither combatant yielded. They broke apart, circling warily, then lunged again, steel screeching louder this time, each strike driving them toward the other. Nathan held back, using the exchange to gauge Ichiro's style. His movements were precise, economical, every parry and riposte measured. By contrast, Ichiro pressed forward like a gathering storm, unleashing a relentless barrage, blade flashing in a blur. Nathan felt the pressure mounting, as if caught in rough seas. Each assault threatened to capsize him, yet he remained upright, drifting calmly amid the onslaught. Their weapons met again and again, ding-dong ziang, the courtyard alive with the sound of metal. Ichiro's speed and aggression battered at Nathan's defenses, but he stood firm, countering only when opportunities opened. He absorbed the storm, then deftly redirected its force. Sparks sprayed at every strike, illuminating the two figures locked in deadly rhythm. In the midst of chaos, Nathan's composure never wavered, an unshakable keel beneath the tempest. Nathan remained astonishingly composed under Ichiro Fukui's unrelenting onslaught. Whenever he could evade a blow, he slipped aside with the slightest movement. When avoidance was impossible, he met the strike head-on, intercepting it with a single precise parry. His footwork was light and deliberate, his posture unerringly balanced, as if he were a dancer pirouetting on the edge of a razor. It looked perilous, but in truth, every motion was under perfect control. The entire exchange felt almost effortless, almost serene. Ichiro's brow furrowed in disbelief. Earlier in their duel, Nathan's swordsmanship had been impressive, but never beyond Ichiro's comprehension. Now, however, every attack he unleashed was turned aside so easily that he began to question his own skill. Was he losing his edge? Was this really the same opponent? That uncertainty seeped into Ichiro's blade arm. His strikes slowed, his timing wavered. Nathan felt the change instantly, a fleeting crack in Ichiro's defense. Huh? Ichiro muttered, eyes widening as he realized his mistake. Seizing the moment without hesitation, Nathan lunged forward. His blade flashed in a single fluid motion, driving cleanly toward his opponent's exposed flank. He had not set out to press the attack, but he would not squander such an opening. In a heartbeat, the balance of the duel had shifted, and Nathan's quiet confidence remained unshaken. Nathan lunged forward, his short sword flashing toward Ichiro Fukui's heart. At the very last moment, a kunai shot in from the side, snapping against the blade and forcing Nathan's attack aside. That shock of noise and motion snapped Ichiro out of his self-doubt. He stared, heart-pounding, at the steel point hove, ring just inches from his chest. "Ichiro, what's wrong with you?" Yoto Iwama's deep voice rang out as he deftly blocked another of Nathan's strikes, sending sparks flying. Ichiro shook his head, forcing his racing thoughts back under control. "Watch out! His swordsmanship, it's incredible!" Yoto frowned. Ichiro had been the one distracted, almost cut down a moment ago. How could he claim the problem was Nathan's sword skills? If Ichiro had fallen under some Sharingan illusion, that might explain the stumble. But swordsmanship? He studied Nathan's stance. Every thrust Ichiro threw had been met with a flawless parry, every slash redirected, every feint anticipated. Nathan's blade never wavered and never gave an opening. The movements were fluid, precise, and powerful, like the currents of a raging river harnessed into steel. Suddenly, Yoto saw it. This was no ordinary opponent. He wasn't just strong, he was supremely trained. His timing, his balance, his ability to read an attack before it even fully formed. This was mastery. Yoto shifted into a guarded stance, nodding at Ichiro. "All right, I see what you mean now. Let's be careful, and stay sharp." Ichiro took a steadying breath. Side by side, the two allies squared their shoulders against Nathan's relentless advance. In that moment, the simple clash of blades became a contest of wills, and only absolute focus would see them through. Nathan's recent display of swordsmanship in the last battle already spoke for itself. So, why the need to harp on it now? The truth was, unless you'd fought side by side with him, you couldn't appreciate just how far he'd come. In his last encounter, Nathan had felt his swordsmanship stat tick up from level 5 to level 6, not because he'd unlocked a flashy new technique, but because his awareness of every nuance in combat had sharpened. To an observer, nothing looked different. Yoto Iwama had watched the entire duel with Fukui Ichiro without noticing a single oddity. Only by living through those split-second decisions could one truly recognize the change. But Yoto Iwama was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Nathan's gaze locked onto the younger shinobi. The short sword hilted in Yoto's hand instantly made him a valid target. With no more hesitation, Nathan stepped forward, blade sweeping through the air in a seamless arc. Swish, clang, clash. In the next moment, he was surrounded by two Iwagakure ninjas. Nathan pressed the attack with the confidence of a warrior 2 levels above them. Steel rang out as he weaved between strikes and parries, every movement crisp, economical, and unerringly precise. Within minutes, the two adversaries were backed against each other, their defenses fractured in the face of his newfound mastery. Nathan's blade hovered at their throats, his dominance unmistakable. At that moment, Yoto Iwama finally understood what Ichiro Fukui had meant when he praised Nathan's swordsmanship as tremendously powerful. It wasn't raw strength alone, it was a transformation in finesse. Once a shinobi masters the basics, the true test becomes command over the smallest details. In a duel between experts, those details decide everything. Nathan's blade technique had just jumped from level 5 to level 6, and that single upgrade amplified his precision and control in ways that only fellow masters could truly appreciate. Ding, ding, ding. Steel sang through the air. Yoto Iwama met Nathan's assault head-on, his kunai flashing to intercept 4 consecutive strikes. But on the 5th, Nathan's short sword bit through, carving a bleeding gouge across Yoto's shoulder. Ah! Yoto staggered back, hand pressed to the wound. Before Nathan could press his advantage, Ichiro Fukui stepped in, placing himself squarely between them. He leveled a calm, steely gaze at Nathan. "That's enough," he said quietly. "I think we've seen all we need to." Nathan had already noticed that, compared to Ichiro Fukui, Yoto Iwama's close-quarters skill was noticeably inferior. He wasn't about to let such an advantage slip away. After deflecting a flurry of blows from Ichiro's sword with a few expert parries, Nathan shifted his focus back to Yoto and launched a fresh assault. True, all jonin excel in ninjutsu, taijutsu, and genjutsu, but they each have their specialties too. Yoto Iwama's strength lay in melee combat, and he could outmatch most mid- or low-rank shinobi, even some jonin whose focus was pure hand-to-hand fighting. Still, against Ichiro's standard, he fell short, and in Nathan's case, fell drastically short. Under Nathan's relentless barrage, Yoto was reduced to nothing more than defensive parries. He had no opening to counterattack. Had Ichiro not consciously held back, disrupting Nathan's rhythm again and again, Yoto might already be badly wounded. That raw display of level 6 swordsmanship, enhanced by the Sharingan, spoke volumes about its lethal potential. As Nathan pressed the advantage, he couldn't help but thrill at the thought of developing even more advanced techniques built on this foundation. Chapter 198, Interference. A sharp whistle of metal sliced through the air as Nathan's spear shot toward Yoto Iwama. Yoto twisted at the last moment, just enough to spare his life, but not his side. The blade grazed his waist, tearing a burning welt into his flesh. From the flank, Ichiro Fukui saw the wound and sprang into action. He charged Nathan, hurling a flurry of strikes to force him to split his attention. Nathan, however, moved with unshakable focus. With a deft sidestep and a flick of his spear, he shrugged off Ichiro's assault and pivoted back toward Yoto. The two Iwa ninja had once managed to coordinate their defenses against him, but Nathan's relentless harrying had steadily worn Yoto down. Each time Yoto faltered under the sting of pain, he grew slower, an anchor that now hampered Ichiro's every move. It was clear, if nothing changed, both would soon fall to Nathan's blade. Ichiro's gut clenched with the realization. He needed to break away, now. Casting Yoto a swift, silent signal, he vowed to create an opening for his partner's escape. Then, summoning every ounce of strength, Ichiro redoubled his offensive, forcing Nathan's focus back onto himself and buying precious seconds for Yoto to recover. Nathan didn't fully understand what was happening, but he sensed the trap. If he loosened his hold, he'd lose control of his opponent's fate. So he channeled more chakra into his binding technique, wrapping Iwama Yoto in an inescapable seal. At the same time, Ichiro Fukui pressed the assault, throwing wave after wave of attacks. Nathan slipped aside whenever he could. If a blow clipped him, he tightened the seal even further, ensuring Yoto stayed trapped and forcing Fukui to stay in the fight. The three shinobi danced across the clearing in a blur of strikes and counters. Yet neither Fukui nor Yoto could slip away. If Yoto tried to break free, Fukui was left dangerously exposed, and Yoto refused to let him face Nathan alone. Minutes stretched on. Yoto's strength flagged, his form growing sluggish. Fukui's breathing turned ragged, sweat stinging his eyes. Just as their stamina threatened to give out, a figure in Iwakure garb burst onto the field. Without hesitation, the newcomer unleashed a thunder-release jutsu, hurling a crackling bolt of lightning straight at Nathan. The impact hit like a cannon blast. In an instant, Nathan's vision fractured. The world melted into an illusion of writhing, electric serpents dancing across a storm-dark sky. The thunderous roar drowned out everything as he slipped into the heart of the tempest. Nathan snapped back to reality the moment he heard the thunderclap. He recognized the technique instantly, the rare thunder escape illusion, triggered by sound. But with his Sharingan's innate resistance to genjutsu and a spiritual attribute of 15, he shook off its effects in an instant. As his vision cleared, 2 kunai blades streaked toward him. In front, Iwama Yodo raised his weapon for a throat strike. At Nathan's left, Ichiro Fukui lunged in for the kill. With every ounce of focus, Nathan activated his Sharingan, flooding his nerves with lightning-fast reflexes. First, he unleashed a hypnotic jolt that froze Yodo in place. Then, twisting away from Fukui's downward thrust, he swept his left hand around Yodo's arm, wrenched the kunai free, and, in one fluid motion, drove it backhand into Fukui's chest. A sickening pop of steel tearing flesh echoed in the courtyard. Before anyone could react, Nathan withdrew the blade. In less time than it takes to blink, both attackers were neutralized. Nathan's movement was so swift it left a faint blur in the air. Fukui Ichiro stared down in shock at the kunai now buried in his palm. "You," Ichiro began, but the word caught in his throat. He'd expected Nathan might evade the attack, or perhaps even counter, but never at this speed. He wasn't the only one surprised. A rookie shinobi from Iwagakure, watching nearby, had been convinced that Iwama Yoto and Fukui Ichiro were dominating Nathan through their combined illusion technique, only to see that illusion shattered in an instant. With a single backhand, Nathan had sliced through Ichiro's defenses. Without waiting for further reaction, Nathan whipped out his short sword and drove it into Yoto's lower abdomen. Yoto's eyes snapped open as the hypnosis snapped away, replaced immediately by searing pain. He staggered backward, clutching his midsection, every breath a razor's edge, and yet he fixed Nathan with a glare of pure defiance. Silence fell. The only sound was Yoto's ragged breathing and Ichiro's last, shallow exhalation as he collapsed to the ground. The new shinobi hesitated, torn between aiding their wounded comrades and confronting this lethal newcomer. Nathan stood unmoving, sword still poised, his dark eyes unblinking, a storm barely contained. Nathan's attacker lunged, kunai aimed straight for his throat. But the moment the blade should have met flesh, Nathan's opponent realized his hand was empty, the weapon had vanished. Turning, he saw Nathan standing a few paces away, the stolen kunai clutched in his left hand and buried to the hilt in Ichiro Fukui's chest. This is my kunai," Iwama Yodo gasped, staggered by the impossible turn of events. Before Yoto could even process it, Nathan yanked the blade free from Fukui's heart and in one fluid motion slashed across Yoto's throat. Both men crumpled to the ground, eyes wide with shock, as their weapons clattered beside them. Nathan didn't pause. He swept his gaze past the 2 bodies to a young jonin standing nearby, the one who had cast the illusion. Nathan's first impression was clear. This jonin was astonishingly young, yet the air around him crackled with power, and Nathan steeled himself for whatever would come next. Nathan sized him up. He looked no older than 15 or 16, yet he'd already earned the rank of jonin in the Hidden Stone Village, a prodigy, without a doubt. And yet, when this young genius caught Nathan's gaze, he instinctively took a half-step back. Nathan's lips curved into a faint smile. "I appreciate your timing," he said smoothly. "If you hadn't shown up, it would have taken me a lot longer to finish off those 2. He nodded toward the 2 motionless bodies at their feet. Even with his overwhelming skill, Nathan knew it would have been difficult to kill both opponents in one fell swoop. Turning a clear advantage into a deadly strike is never guaranteed, especially with other rock ninjas nearby ready to jump in, willing to sacrifice a single comrade to save another. In theory, he shouldn't have been able to dispatch them both so cleanly, but thanks to this unexpected ally, the job was done. Nathan's illusion had been the perfect trap. By luring Iwama Yoto and Fukui Ichiro into a reckless strike, he gave them exactly the opening they needed, and then woke up long before they expected. Their surprise attack collided with Nathan's counterblow, and both shinobi fell, slain before they even realized how shallow their guard had become. Yet it wouldn't be fair to say that the young Iwa ninja had truly saved him. In truth, Yoto and Ichiro had labored under Nathan's relentless pressure for too long. The instant that burden vanished, they relaxed and paid the price for their carelessness. Still, Nathan feigned gratitude as part of his own strategy. If the boy had actually turned tail at the sight of him, it meant his resolve might be weaker than it looked. Nathan intended to exploit that. He met the young shinobi's eyes and let his voice drop to a casual tone. "By the way," he said, "do you bear any grudges against them?" The boy's face darkened, color draining as he stared back. "What nonsense," he snapped. "Why would I hold a grudge, or help you, of all people?" Before the sentence was out of his mouth, Nathan's Sharingan eyes snapped open. A ripple of hypnotic chakra pulsed outward, ready to bend the boy's will to his own. Chapter 199, Interception. Nathan froze. What? Despite his fraying nerves from the relentless blows he'd suffered, the Iwagakure boy's reflexes remained razor-sharp. The instant Nathan unleashed his hypnotic technique, the boy sensed the disturbance. He cried out, slammed his eyes shut, and bounded backward. That sudden retreat added just enough distance to shatter Nathan's concentration. His hypnosis fizzled before it could take hold. But Nathan didn't hesitate. With both hands, he whipped out 6 steel shuriken, 3 in each palm, and sent them spinning toward his opponent. The blades were small, swift, and nearly silent as they cut through the air, almost impossible to spot without keen eyesight. As the shuriken closed in, the boy's eyes flew open. Summoning a surge of speed, he formed the hand seals of the substitute technique. In a blur, he vanished, and in his place lay a lone, unremarkable stone. Ding, ding, ding. Shuriken pinged off the stone slab with sharp cracks, leaving only tiny white flecks and shallow gouges. Nathan's attack had once again failed to land, but he didn't lose heart. His Sharingan eyes tracked the unseen foe as he slipped into motion, forming hand seals the moment he activated his body replacement technique. In a blink, he vanished and reappeared behind cover, completing the final seals. Fire Release, Phoenix Immortal Fire Technique. A roaring jet of flame burst from Nathan's mouth, unfolding like a fan of fierce embered petals. The fiery wave swept around a nearby tree, and there, crouched in wait, was the young Iwa ninja, Aikawa Suke. "He's too fast." Suke's eyes widened as twin walls of fire closed in. He had barely a heartbeat to react before he rolled to his side, pressing himself flat against the forest floor. Crack! 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 The flames slammed into the trunk, carving fist-sized craters of blackened bark. His pulse pounding, Suke leapt up, muttering the seals for Shunshin no Jutsu, flash body technique. In an instant, he blurred past Nathan's line of sight, racing deeper into the shadowed woods as the echoes of scorching wood hissed in his wake. Although he had never faced Nathan in person, he'd seen how Haruto Iwama and Ichiro Fukui had been utterly overwhelmed by him. He dared not risk close-quarters combat. Right from the start, Nathan had advanced relentlessly, forcing him to keep his distance and play defense. He convinced himself that it was wiser to wait for a truly safe opening before counterattacking, but Nathan had already given him one, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. Even with his instant technique granting him extraordinary speed, his foe still couldn't match Nathan's 3 Magatama Sharingan tuned to perfection. In an instant, Nathan lofted a shuriken that sliced across his path. Aikawa Suke twisted aside, but another shuriken followed. He dodged again. A third projectile whistled past, then a fourth, a fifth, and finally a sixth, each thrown in rapid succession to seal off every escape route. Cornered at last, Aikawa Suke skidded to a halt, his face darkening with frustration. Nathan charged at Aikawa Suke with unrelenting speed, forcing his opponent to react. In a blur of movement, Aikawa formed the necessary hand seals and pressed his palms together, unleashing a towering pillar of searing white light. Its brilliance ignited Nathan's retinas, compelling him to shut his eyes, and for a heartbeat, his mind spiraled into chaos. Though this lightning release, pillar of thunderlight, was only a visual illusion, unlike the auditory mirage of the usual thunder release, it carried enough suppressive power to strain even the Sharingan. That fleeting moment of disorientation proved all Aikawa needed. From a short distance, he sent a volley of shurikens streaking toward Nathan. As soon as his vision cleared, Nathan spotted the deadly projectiles hurtling through the air. The Magatama in his pupils spun to life, and with a single, razor-sharp glance, he locked onto their flight paths. Nathan slipped each of Aikawa's strikes with a few swift ducks and senks ID steps. Even as he moved, his hands wove intricate seals. When he came to a halt, he thrust out his chin and snarled the words that marked his clan's most feared technique, Fire release! Great fireball jutsu! A molten orb, no larger than his fist, burst from Nathan's mouth. It whirled and expanded in midair until it swelled to a 3-meter inferno. The heat rolled toward Aikawa in a blazing wave. Without a moment's hesitation, Aikawa-suke leapt aside. Boom! The fireball streaked over Aikawa's retreat, slammed into an ancient pine, and detonated on contact. Splinters of charred wood flew in every direction, carried on tongues of flame like a shower of burning petals. Caught off guard by the sudden blast, Aikawa scrambled to dodge the ravenous embers. But in that split second of distraction, Nathan was already upon him. The clean, ringing sound of steel drawn from its sheath split the acrid air. Nathan's short sword flashed as he lunged straight at Aikawa, determined to finish the fight before his opponent could recover. Joninsuke found himself with nowhere to fall back. He drew a kunai and squared off against Nathan, blades poised in the dim light. Nathan's skill at close quarters was only middling, yet in barely a dozen exchanges, the younger shinobi's blade slashed across Suke's forearm, opening a nasty cut. A jonin of Suke's standing shouldn't be undone so quickly, but Nathan had one decisive edge. His swordsmanship ranked at level 6, far beyond Suke's own. By forcing a one-on-one duel and cloaking his movements, Nathan had also mastered the art of attacking from blind spots. Blood welled on Suke's skin, the sting driving every nerve in his body awake. He narrowed his eyes, flooding his senses with chakra to detect the slightest hint of motion. Then, in an instant, a second sword shot out of his blind spot. Reaction sharp as lightning, Suke swung his kunai upward. Tin! The metal blades collided with a ringing clang, sparks dancing in the silence that followed. But the moment the echo died away, Nathan was gone, vanished like smoke, leaving Suke alone with the ringing in his ears and the fresh ache in his arm. Shangchuanji barely caught sight of a flash of cloth as Nathan moved, a single flicker of his dark robes. That was all it took for him to understand the legend behind the ghost swordsman. Nathan fought like a phantom, never fully visible, never where you expected, and deadly the moment you lost track of him. It was as if he materialized only to deliver a fatal strike before vanishing again. No wonder the village shinobi warned that even seasoned chunin and jinin would scatter the moment they encountered him. 1,000 thoughts raced through Shangchuanji's mind, but he banished them instantly. There would be time later to puzzle over Nathan's uncanny style. Right now, there was only one goal: survive. The ambush had been over before anyone else realized what was happening. No other jonin had drawn near, or if they had, they were just as caught off guard. But reinforcements had to be coming. If he could just stall for a little longer, someone would break through and lend support. With that single thought anchoring him, Shangchuanji braced for Nathan's next ghostly assault and prepared to hold on until help arrived. Armed with that plan, Shangchuanji dug in, and with every ounce of his strength, he held the line, buying Nathan the precious seconds he needed. Chapter 200. Rescue! Clang! 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 Nathan saw Aikawa-suke flawlessly block 3 sword strikes in rapid succession. In that instant, he realized exactly what the enemy was trying to do. From his vantage point, it was clear the rock ninjas held the upper hand. No matter how many Konoha reinforcements arrived, the rocks always maintained superior numbers thanks to staggered deployment. And since they were all elite shinobi, Konoha's casualty rate kept climbing far more quickly than their foes. To make matters worse, more rock ninjas were already zeroing in on their position. If they weren't stopped immediately, they'd buy precious time for their comrades. Nathan braced himself and launched into a fierce assault, determined to break the enemy's momentum. The sound of metal clashing filled the air as his sword met Aikawa-suke's defenses. Aikawa-suke gripped his kunai tightly, twisting and pivoting to ward off attacks from every blind spot. Despite his skill and tenacity, he couldn't escape completely unscathed. A shallow cut bloomed across his arm, a sharp reminder of Nathan's relentless onslaught. Nathan pressed his attack with everything he had, yet even after only a dozen exchanged blows, 2 fresh scars formed across his side. The cuts weren't deep, but they were enough to jar his focus. He capitalized on that slight advantage, driving the fight forward. In the past, Nathan wouldn't have caught those tiny openings, but now that his swordsmanship had risen from level 5 to level 6, his precision was razor sharp. Still, he knew finesse alone wouldn't win this battle. If he had time, and no one waiting in the wings, he could whittle his opponent down, stroke by stroke. But with enemy reinforcements potentially arriving at any moment, every second counted. So when Shang Chuanji raised his blade to deflect yet another slash, Nathan struck decisively with an A-rank jutsu, the Rasengan. Over the past month, Nathan's Rasengan had climbed from level 3 to level 4, and his chakra control had never been tighter. In a flash, a high-density sphere of chakra coalesced in his left palm. He thrust it hard against the small of Shang Chuanji's back, right over the heart. An unbearable wave of dread crashed through Shang Chuanji's senses. He barely had time to register the attack before it was too late. Nathan's heart pounded as he formed a crackling sphere of chakra, his makeshift Rasengan, in his palm. Across the clearing, Aitsuki gritted his teeth, channeling lightning chakra into his legs. Crack! Muscles and nerves fired in overdrive. At the very last moment, he sprang aside, almost evading the spinning orb. Almost. The Rasengan still scraped across his lower back, shredding his tunic and carving a cruel, twisting scar into his flesh. Ugh! Ikawasuke groaned, tasting blood. He forced himself upright, eyes blazing, and twisted just in time to dodge Nathan's diagonal sword slash. Nathan didn't let him rest. In the blink of an eye, he followed up with a whirlwind of steel, each stroke coming faster than the last, shifting angles so rapidly that the blade seemed to multiply. Shang Chuanji, standing nearby as Nathan's second opponent, lifted his arms to defend. There was no time to react. Swish! The last strike cut deep, a harsh, tearing sound of flesh and steel colliding echoing through the air. Shang Chuanji staggered, clutching the fresh wound, as Nathan's blade hummed with lethal intent, ready for the next move. Nathan's short sword flashed like a viper's fang, carving a deep, ragged gash across the upper left side of Shang Chuanji's waist. He had intended to strike for the heart, but at the last moment, Shang Chuanji twisted aside, yet the blow still landed. The wound seared with fire, immediately draining nearly a fifth of his fighting strength, enough to kill an ordinary man. Undeterred, Nathan flowed around him like living shadow, unleashing blow after blow. Shang Chuanji gritted his teeth, forcing his muscles and nerves to fire on overdrive despite the searing pain from his earlier thunderstep escape. His body screamed, but he kept pace, parrying and dodging as best he could. Even so, artificial stimulation only lasts so long. 3 relentless minutes later, the crackling lightning that had danced across Shang Chuanji's skin winked out. His reflexes dulled, his speed plummeted. Nathan's eyes blazed with triumph. In a heartbeat, he lunged again, plunging the short sword straight into Shang Chuanji's lower back. There was a sickening crunch as the blade found purchase, and a geyser of dark blood sprayed into the air. For a moment, everything stood still. Then Shang Chuanji's knees buckled, and he slumped forward, the fight finally draining from him. Nathan withdrew his blade, the echo of metal on bone ringing in the silent aftermath. Shang Chuan screamed, a flash of agony ripping through him. He doubled over, clutching his side, but Nathan paid him no heed. Calmly, Nathan extended his left hand, gathering chakra into a dense, spinning sphere, the Rasengan. In an instant, he lunged, driving the crackling ball of energy straight toward Shang Chuan's exposed back. Stop! A sharp shout echoed from nearby. Nathan whirled to see a middle-aged rock ninja sprinting toward them, 3 shurikens streaking through the air. If he pressed his attack, he'd only manage to dodge 2 of the blades. If he backed off, he could escape unscathed. Weighing his options in a heartbeat, Nathan chose to preserve his guard for the battles still to come. He pulled back just in time, the shuriken whistling past harmlessly. Then, in one fluid motion, he drew his short sword and slashed across Shang Chuan's waist. A crimson arc flew into the air as Shang Chuan staggered, blood seeping from a deep, ragged wound. Nathan's eyes remained cold, ready for whatever challenge came next. Nathan watched with cold satisfaction as Shang Chuanji staggered under the weight of his injuries. Between the deep puncture wound Nathan had just inflicted and the countless scars from their previous battles, the once formidable rock ninja was virtually powerless. Yet Nathan wasn't content to leave anything to chance. As they broke into a tactical withdrawal, he slipped a kunai, its blade inscribed with a detonating talisman, from his ninja pouch and hurled it straight at Shang Chuanji. Damn it! The middle-aged rock ninja swore under his breath. In an instant, he blurred across the clearing to reach Xiang Chuanji's side. Grabbing him by the shoulders, he yanked him out of the kunai's trajectory just as it embedded itself in the ground. Boom! A roaring blaze erupted. Flames licked the smoky air, and a concussive shockwave surged outward, sending both Xiang Chuanji and his rescuer crashing to the earth. Nathan leaped back, narrowly evading the blast. He landed lightly on the balls of his feet, eyes already tracking the precise spots where Xiang Chuanji and the middle-aged ninja would fall. His hands flew into position, fingers weaving a rapid sequence of hand seals. With a fierce cry, he unleashed his next jutsu. Fire style, great fireball technique. Boom! A towering orb of fire detonated, incinerating the swirling dust and scorching the ground beneath. When the heat subsided and the smoke drifted away, the two adversaries lay motionless among the smoldering remains, proof that Nathan would show no mercy to those who stood in his path. Nathan brushed the lingering dust aside and peered toward the crater where the fireball had detonated. But there was no trace of the middle-aged rock ninja or Ikawasuke. They must have slipped away during the explosion. Just as he began searching for their tracks, a spray of kunai whistled in from his side, aiming straight for his vital points. In the same instant, Nathan's eyes snapped around. The Magatama marks in his pupils glowed and whirled, instantly calculating each kunai's flight path. He caught sight of his assailant, the very rock ninja who had rescued Ikawasuke. Now the man crouched behind a sturdy oak, his breath coming in short gasps. A trickle of blood stained his tunic, but he hadn't been gravely wounded. His earlier attack had missed its mark. Nathan narrowed his gaze, sensing the man's chakra. It radiated with the strength of a jonin. Yet, given the fluid precision of those thrown kunai, it was clear this shinobi had fought in more than one campaign. His true power must exceed that of an ordinary jonin, matching perfectly the skill Nathan had just witnessed.